Have you ever walked through an ancient ruin or read about a forgotten empire and felt a shiver of mystery run down your spine? It's a haunting thought that entire societies, once vibrant and powerful, can simply vanish from the pages of history, leaving behind only fragments of their existence. These civilizations didn't fade quietly into obscurity. They disappeared, often without explanation, leaving us with more questions than answers. From sprawling cities swallowed by jungles to advanced cultures erased by time, their stories whisper to us through crumbling stones, cryptic symbols, and legends passed down through generations. Today, we're embarking on a journey to uncover the secrets of 30 such lost civilization societies that thrived, influenced their world, and then vanished almost as if they were never there. What happened to them? Did environmental disasters strike without warning? Did war or internal collapse tear them apart? Or did they simply choose to disappear, leaving behind clues that even modern archaeologists struggle to decipher? This isn't just a history lesson, it's a dive into one of humanity's greatest mysteries, a puzzle that connects us to our past in ways that are both humbling and thrilling. As we explore these enigmatic cultures, you'll discover tales of innovation, resilience, and sometimes terrifying sudden ends. You'll walk alongside explorers unearthing lost cities, decipher ancient scripts that still guard their secrets, and piece together the evidence left behind, from sunken ports to abandoned temples. This is more than a list. It's an invitation to wonder, to question, and to marvel at the fragile yet enduring legacy of human civilization. So settle in, open your mind to the possibilities, and join me as we step into the shadows of history to uncover the stories of those who vanished without a trace. Our journey begins not in some remote, hidden corner of the world, but in a vast, fertile river basin that was once home to one of humanity's most astonishing and puzzling early societies, the Indus Valley Civilization. Flourishing for nearly 2,000 years, from around 3,300 BC to 1300 BC, this civilization was a contemporary of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet its story is uniquely its own, marked by a level of sophistication that still leaves archaeologists in awe. At its peak, it spanned over 1 million square kilometers across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, a domain larger than either of its famed counterparts, and within it thrived a people of remarkable ingenuity and order. The most breathtaking testament to their advancement is found in their cities, particularly the great metropolises of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. These were not haphazard collections of buildings. They were meticulously planned urban centers built on a strict grid system, a concept that wouldn't become standard in city planning for thousands of years. Wide, straight streets cut through residential and commercial districts, while a sophisticated and incredibly modern sanitation system ran beneath them. Nearly every house had a dedicated bathroom connected to a network of covered drains and clay pipes that channeled wastewater out of the city. They built massive, raised citadels that likely served as administrative or religious centers, and enormous public granaries that hint at a highly organized and efficient system for storing and distributing food. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a carefully engineered society that prioritized public health and civic order on a scale that is difficult to comprehend for such an ancient culture. Yet, for all their incredible architectural and administrative prowess, their voices are utterly silent to us. The Indus Valley people developed a writing system, with over 400 distinct symbols found carved into seals, pottery, and copper tablets. But unlike the Rosetta Stone that unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphs, their script remains one of history's most frustrating and enduring puzzles. Linguists and cryptographers have tried for decades to decipher it, but the inscriptions are frustratingly short, and no bilingual text has ever been found. We can see their symbols: a peculiar unicorn-like creature, a meditating figure, intricate patterns, but we cannot hear their words. We don't know their names, their stories, their laws, or their prayers. This silence amplifies the mystery of their end. Around 1900 BC, this vibrant, orderly civilization began to crumble. The great cities, once bustling with life, were slowly, systematically abandoned. There's no evidence of a single catastrophic invasion, no layers of ash from a great fire, no mass graves suggesting a violent end. Instead, the archaeological record points to a gradual but relentless decline. The quality of building construction deteriorated, the elaborate drainage systems fell into disrepair, and the standardized weights and measures that had facilitated trade across the region began to disappear. It was a slow-motion collapse of a societal system that had stood for centuries. So what happened? The leading theory points to profound environmental change. The lifeblood of the civilization was a network of rivers, including the mighty and now defunct Ganga-Hakra river system, often identified with the legendary Saraswati River. Geological evidence suggests that around this time, a period of intensified monsoons may have initially swollen these rivers, only to be followed by a prolonged and devastating drought. The rivers shifted their courses or dried up entirely, crippling the agricultural base that sustained the urban population. This climate shift could have triggered mass migrations toward the Ganges basin, dispersing the population and fragmenting their cultural cohesion until their unique urban identity simply faded away. Other theories suggest that tectonic activity may have altered the landscape and disrupted river flows, or that the very stability of their society for centuries made them vulnerable to new pressures. While some earlier ideas proposed an invasion by nomadic Indo-European speakers known as the Aryans, this theory has largely fallen out of favor due to a lack of supporting archaeological evidence for widespread warfare. The truth is, their disappearance was likely not the result of a single villain, but a complex tapestry of environmental disaster and social unraveling, a cautionary tale of how even the most advanced and resilient civilizations are intimately tied to the whims of the natural world they inhabit. From the orderly, river-fed plains of the Indus Valley, our search for lost civilizations carries us westward across continents and into the sun-drenched Aegean Sea to the island of Crete. Here, a culture so vibrant and sophisticated emerged that it would become the very stuff of legend, the Minoan civilization. Thriving from approximately 2700 to 1450 BC, the Minoans were Europe's first advanced society, a maritime empire whose influence stretched across the Mediterranean and whose artistic spirit feels startlingly modern even today. The undeniable heart of their world was the palace. These were not merely royal residences, but the bustling economic, administrative, and religious centers of entire regions. The greatest of them all was the magnificent complex at Knossos, a sprawling, multi-storied structure so vast and bewildering in its layout that it would later inspire the Greek myth of the labyrinth, a maze built to contain the monstrous Minotaur. Wandering through its reconstructed ruins, you can almost feel the energy of what it once was. A place of grand courtyards for public gatherings, intricate networks of corridors and staircases, specialized workshops for skilled artisans, and vast storage magazines filled with enormous clay jars that held oil, wine, and grain, the wealth of the kingdom. This architectural genius, with its light wells providing air and illumination and its advanced plumbing systems, speaks of a people who mastered their environment with elegance and grace. This vibrant, life-affirming culture is brilliantly captured in their art. Unlike the formal and often somber art of their contemporaries, Minoan frescoes burst with color and movement. Walls are adorned with lithe acrobats leaping over charging bulls, elegant figures in elaborate court costumes, and serene portraits of women dubbed La Parisienne for their unmistakably modern allure. Their artwork teems with natural life. Dolphins arc through azure seas, monkeys play in lush landscapes, and octopuses wrap their tentacles around beautifully painted pottery. This was not art dedicated to glorifying conquest or deifying stern rulers. It celebrated nature, ritual, and the joy of existence itself, offering a window into a society that seemed to value beauty, athleticism, and a deep connection to the natural world. Yet, this flourishing civilization faced a cataclysm of almost unimaginable scale. Around 1600 BC, the volcanic island of Thera, 110 kilometers north of Crete, exploded in one of the most violent eruptions in human history. The event was apocalyptic. The center of the island collapsed into the sea, creating the caldera we see today at Santorini. The Minoans would have witnessed a towering plume of ash darkening the sky, felt powerful earthquakes rock their cities, and then, crucially, been struck by devastating tsunamis. These towering waves, generated by the collapse of the volcano, would have raced across the sea to smash into Crete's northern coast, obliterating its vital fleet of ships, the source of its maritime power, and inundating fertile coastal plains with salt water and volcanic debris. While it wasn't a single killing blow, the Thera eruption was a devastating sucker punch from which the Minoan civilization never fully recovered. The massive ashfall would have crippled agriculture for years, leading to famine. The destruction of their fleet shattered their economic network of trade. The psychological impact of such a disaster, likely woven into their religious beliefs, must have been profound. Weakened and vulnerable, the palaces were eventually looted and burned around 1450 BCE. The question of who delivered the final blow is a subject of ongoing debate. The most likely culprits were the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece, a rising, more warlike power who saw a golden opportunity to seize control of the lucrative Aegean trade routes. Archaeological evidence shows a sudden presence of Mycenaean weaponry and burial practices on Crete at this time. Alternatively, some scholars suggest internal revolt or civil war, as a desperate population struggled for dwindling resources in the aftermath of the disaster. Whatever the final cause, the brilliant, unique light of Minoan culture was extinguished, its palaces abandoned to silence and myth for over 3 millennia. But just as the Minoans were swept away by the sea, another civilization on the other side of the world was rising to dizzying heights of intellectual and architectural mastery, only to leave its own magnificent cities to be reclaimed by the jungle. The Maya civilization of Mesoamerica represents one of history's most profound and captivating enigmas, a society that forged a dazzlingly advanced culture in an incredibly challenging environment, only to experience a collapse so thorough that its great ceremonial centers fell into a silence that would last for 1,000 years. Their story begins not with a single event, but with a gradual and remarkable ascent. From around 2000 BC, Maya societies took root in the dense rainforests and arid highlands of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. This was not a unified empire in the Roman sense, but a dynamic network of independent city-states, each with its own divine ruler, yet bound together by a shared culture, religion, and one of the most sophisticated writing systems ever developed in the ancient world. It is this intellectual achievement that truly sets them apart. While Europe was stumbling through its dark ages, Maya astronomers were calculating the solar year with greater accuracy than the Gregorian calendar we use today. They precisely tracked the complex cycles of Venus, predicted solar eclipses, and developed the concept of zero, a mathematical leap that eluded many other contemporary cultures. Their calendar systems, often sensationalized in modern times, were actually monuments to their deep understanding of time as a sacred, cyclical force. This intellectual brilliance was made manifest in stone. Their cities are breathtaking feats of engineering and artistic vision. Imagine the towering, steep-sided pyramid of Temple Roman IV at Tikal, piercing the green canopy of the rainforest from where a ruler could look out over a domain of gods and humans. Picture the exquisite sculptural artistry of the reliefs at Palenque, particularly the ornate tomb lid of the ruler Pakal, which some have fantastically misinterpreted as an astronaut in a rocket ship, but which more accurately reveals the Mayas' complex cosmology and belief in a journey through the underworld. And of course, there is the awe-inspiring grandeur of Chichen Itza, with its massive El Castillo pyramid designed to cast a serpent-like shadow during the equinoxes, a perfect marriage of celestial observation and architectural genius. These were not just population centers, they were holy places, the physical expression of a world where the human and divine realms were intimately connected. Then, around the 9th century CE, something went terribly wrong in the southern lowlands, the very heart of the classic Maya world. One by one, the great cities of the classic period fell silent. The practice of erecting carved stone stelae to commemorate kings and their achievements ceased abruptly. Grand construction projects were halted midway. The royal palaces were abandoned, and the plazas where crowds once gathered for ceremonies were left to the encroaching jungle. This was not a sudden, single catastrophe that felled every city at once, but a rolling collapse, a wave of failure that spread across the region over more than 100 years. It was a slow-motion unraveling of a centuries-old social order. Unraveling the mystery of this collapse is one of archaeology's greatest cold cases, and the evidence points not to a single culprit but a perfect storm of interconnected disasters. For decades, the dominant theory pointed to widespread warfare. Inscriptions on monuments shift from celebrating births and ascensions to detailing captures and victories. Defensive walls were hastily built around once open cities, and evidence of elite capture and sacrifice becomes more common. It seems the competition between city-states escalated from ritualized conflict into total existential war, shattering the fragile political landscape. Yet, warfare was likely a symptom of a deeper crisis. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores from nearby lakes have uncovered compelling evidence for a series of severe, multi-decadal droughts that crippled the region at precisely this time. The Maya were utterly dependent on seasonal rainfall for their intricate system of reservoir and canal-based water management. A prolonged failure of the rains would have led to catastrophic crop failure, famine, and mass thirst. Imagine the desperation as reservoirs shrank, the dust blew, and the once reliable gods seemed to have turned their backs. This environmental catastrophe would have placed unbearable strain on the social contract. The Maya king's primary divine duty was to intercede with the gods to ensure rain and prosperity. When the rains failed generation after generation, the people's faith in their divine rulers would have evaporated along with the water, likely triggering internal revolts and the abandonment of the very institutions that had held society together. The collapse was likely a vicious cycle. Drought led to food shortages, which fueled warfare over dwindling resources, which in turn made it impossible to manage the landscape effectively, leading to further environmental degradation like deforestation and soil exhaustion. The political system, built on the fragile premise of divine kingship, fractured under the strain. The result was not the disappearance of the Maya people, but the catastrophic collapse of their intricate political and cultural system. Populations declined sharply, with many migrating north to newer cities or back to scattered village life. The great intellectual pursuits, the astronomical observations, the complex calendar keeping, the erecting of monuments simply stopped. The jungle moved in, swallowing the towering pyramids and silent palaces, guarding their secrets until explorers and archaeologists began to peel back the layers of green, revealing the haunting story of a civilization that reached for the stars but was ultimately brought low by the earth itself. Leaving the overgrown pyramids of the Maya behind, we crossed the Pacific to a civilization whose architectural ambition was so grand that its heart remains the largest religious monument ever constructed, the sprawling, majestic complex of Angkor Wat. This is the story of the Khmer Empire, a Southeast Asian powerhouse that dominated the region for centuries, only to see its magnificent capital slowly emptied and its influence wane into legend. The empire's ascent began in the early 9th century when a king named Jayavarman II declared himself a universal monarch, a Devaraja or god king, unifying smaller states under his rule. But the true genius of the Khmers was their masterful and audacious engineering of the landscape itself. At the core of their prosperity was the monsoonal climate, which brought a deluge of rain for half the year and a punishing dry season for the other. The Khmer response was to build a vast, intricate hydraulic city. They constructed enormous reservoirs called barrays, some stretching 5 miles long, and a complex network of canals, moats, and embankments. This system did more than just prevent flooding. It allowed them to store vast quantities of water to irrigate rice paddies throughout the dry season, enabling them to produce 3 or 4 crops per year instead of one. This agricultural surplus fueled a population boom, supported a massive standing army, and funded incredible architectural projects, creating a cycle of wealth and power that seemed unbreakable. This wealth found its ultimate expression in stone. The capital city, Angkor, grew to cover nearly 400 square miles, supporting a population that may have approached 1 million people at its peak, making it one of the pre-modern world's largest urban centers. Its temples were not just places of worship but symbolic models of the Hindu and later Buddhist cosmos. Angkor Wat itself, built in the 12th century by King Suryavarman II, is a breathtaking representation of Mount Meru, the home of the gods. Its 5 iconic towers, its immense bas-relief galleries depicting epic myths and historical battles, and its precise alignment with the sun during equinoxes stand as a permanent testament to Khmer artistic vision, spiritual devotion, and astronomical knowledge. It was a city of gods, built by and for a society that believed its rulers were divinely connected to the forces of the universe. Yet, by the 15th century, this powerful center was in decline. The royal court abandoned Angkor, relocating south to areas near modern Phnom Penh, and the great capital was gradually swallowed by the relentless jungle. For a long time, historians pointed to a single dramatic event, a devastating invasion in 1431 by the rival Ayutthaya kingdom from what is now Thailand, which reportedly sacked the city and carried off its population. While this invasion was certainly a severe blow, it's now understood to be a final symptom of a decline already well underway, not the sole cause. The empire's greatest strength, its complex water management system, may have become its most critical weakness. Sediment cores from the moats and barrays reveal evidence of decades-long failures of the monsoon rains, followed by periods of intense flooding. This climatic volatility would have placed immense strain on the meticulously engineered network. A prolonged drought would have left the reservoirs empty, leading to crop failure and famine. Conversely, extremely heavy monsoon rains could have overwhelmed the canals and dams, causing catastrophic flooding that destroyed infrastructure and silted up the vital waterways. The system required constant, expert maintenance by a powerful central authority to function. As the climate became more erratic, the system may have begun to fail, undermining the king's perceived divine power to control the waters and ensure prosperity. This environmental stress likely sparked a vicious cycle. Food shortages would have led to social unrest, making the kingdom vulnerable to the very external threats it had once easily repelled. The shift in state religion from Hinduism to the Theravada Buddhism, which doesn't emphasize the god-king concept, may have further eroded the ideological foundation of the ruler's absolute authority. The decision to move the capital south was likely a pragmatic one, closer to the burgeoning maritime trade routes of the Mekong Delta and away from a hydraulic system that was becoming too difficult and costly to maintain. The Khmer Empire didn't vanish overnight. It underwent a long, slow transformation, its heart abandoned not to a sudden cataclysm, but to a gradual but decisive unraveling of the environmental and social contracts that had once made it invincible. The jungle crept in, wrapping Angkor in roots and silence, until it was remembered less as a real city and more as a mythical dream, a lost world waiting to be rediscovered. But our journey through vanished worlds now takes us to a culture so foundational that it has been called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmec. Long before the Maya erected their pyramids or the Aztecs built their empire, the Olmec civilization was laying the cultural and artistic groundwork for all that would follow. Flourishing between 1400 and 400 BC along the humid, river-rich Gulf Coast of Mexico, the Olmecs were pioneers, creating a template for complex society in the region that would endure for millennia. The most iconic and staggering evidence of their presence are the colossal stone heads, carved from immense basalt boulders, some weighing 20 tons or more and standing nearly 10 feet tall. These sculptures are believed to be portraits of powerful Olmec rulers. Each head is unique, wearing a distinctive helmet or headdress with stern, imposing features, broad noses, thick lips, and a gaze that seems to hold centuries of secrets. The sheer logistics of their creation and transport is a marvel that speaks volumes about Olmec society. The basalt was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, miles away from their ceremonial centers, and archaeologists believe these massive stones were moved on rafts along rivers and then rolled overland on rollers, a monumental effort requiring a highly organized labor force and a centralized commanding authority. Yet their artistry extended far beyond these giant visages. The Olmecs were master sculptors, creating finely worked jade figurines. Terrifying were jaguar masks that blended human and feline features, and massive carved altars that may have served as thrones. They developed a core set of spiritual beliefs, including a fascination with a rain deity and a feathered serpent, concepts that would echo through later Mesoamerican religions. Crucially, there is compelling, though still debated, evidence that the Olmecs were among the first in the hemisphere to develop a system of writing. A cylindrical seal and a greenstone plaque have been found bearing glyphs that appear to be a precursor to later scripts, suggesting they were not just artists and builders, but scribes recording their own history in a language we have yet to fully understand. The heart of their world beat in great ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo, which dominated the region from around 1400 to 900 BC. This was not a city of common dwellings, but a sprawling political and religious capital built on a massive, artificially raised plateau. Its rulers orchestrated the construction of elaborate drainage systems made of stone and the collection of the famous basalt heads, which were arranged in lines, perhaps guarding the sacred precinct. However, around 900 BC, San Lorenzo was violently destroyed. The colossal heads were deliberately defaced and mutilated, and many were buried in long lines as if systematically decommissioned. This was not a casual abandonment, it was a calculated act of desecration. Power then shifted north to a new center, La Venta. Built on an island in a coastal swamp, La Venta became the new epicenter of Olmec culture for the next 4 centuries. Here, they constructed their most impressive ceremonial complex, including a giant clay pyramid and elaborate tombs filled with precious offerings of jade and serpentine. The city was meticulously aligned on a north-south axis, revealing an advanced understanding of astronomy and urban planning. But by around 400 BC, La Venta too met a strange end. Like San Lorenzo before it, its monuments were carefully buried. Great offerings of carved stone and precious gems were laid in deep pits and covered over, and the site was abandoned. This pattern of deliberate, ritual interment rather than simple desertion is one of the most puzzling aspects of their disappearance. So what caused the collapse of this foundational civilization? The evidence points not to a foreign invasion. There are no signs of outside attackers, but to internal and environmental pressures. One leading theory suggests that environmental degradation, specifically silting of the rivers they depended on for transport and agriculture, made their core territories unsustainable. Another points to tectonic activity or a shift in river courses that disrupted their trade networks and food production. The most intriguing possibility is that the downfall was social and political. The systematic defacement and burial of the monuments at San Lorenzo and La Venta suggests internal rebellion, a revolt against the ruling class. the common people, perhaps burdened by the enormous labor, demands of moving multi-ton stones and building colossal earthworks, may have finally risen up, overthrowing their rulers and consciously rejecting the very symbols of their power. They didn't just leave, they attempted to erase the old order, burying the colossal heads as a final act of closure. The Olmec civilization as a centralized power faded away, but its immense cultural DNA, its art, its gods, its ideas about kingship and writing, was inherited by every major culture that came after, making it a civilization that disappeared in name only, its legacy enduring long after its cities fell silent. From the lush, tropical heartlands of the Olmec, we now travel to a landscape of stark and breathtaking contrast: the high, arid deserts of the American Southwest. Here, a remarkable culture, often called the Anasazi, but more accurately known as the ancestral Puebloans, carved out a life of astonishing sophistication in one of North America's most challenging environments. Their story, which unfolded between approximately 100 and 1600 CE, is one of incredible adaptation and architectural genius, culminating in a mysterious exodus that left their magnificent stone cities empty. The genius of the ancestral Puebloans is most visibly etched into the very cliffs and mesas they called home. Their architectural evolution is a fascinating journey in itself. They began by building pit houses, semi-subterranean dwellings dug into the earth and roofed with log and mud frameworks. But over centuries, their building techniques ascended to new heights, literally and figuratively. They began constructing expansive, multi-storied communal villages known as pueblos, using expertly shaped sandstone blocks held together with a mud mortar. These were not random collections of rooms, they were complex, planned communities with central plazas, underground ceremonial chambers called kivas, and intricate layouts that suggest a highly organized and cooperative society. Their architectural prowess reached its absolute zenith in the 13th century with the construction of the now iconic cliff dwellings. Places like the Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde represent one of the most dramatic and ingenious adaptations to environment in human history. Built into immense south-facing sandstone alcoves high up on canyon walls, these cities in the sky were perfectly positioned to capture the warming winter sun while being sheltered from the elements. Access was nearly impossible, requiring a climb up removable ladders through narrow cracks in the cliff face, a brilliant defensive feature. Inside, they constructed towers that reached several stories high, terraced apartments with hundreds of rooms, and carefully engineered water collection systems to channel scarce rainfall. This was a society that didn't just survive in the desert, it thrived by mastering it, turning the canyon walls themselves into a fortress and a home. Beyond their physical buildings, the ancestral Puebloans demonstrated a profound connection to the cosmos. This is nowhere more evident than at Choco Canyon, the undisputed ceremonial and economic center of their world. Despite its location in a harsh, unforgiving basin, Choco became the hub of a vast network of roads that radiated out for miles, perfectly straight and engineered across the difficult terrain, connecting over 150 outlying communities to the main canyon. At its heart lay massive, sprawling great houses like Pueblo Bonito, a D-shaped structure with over 600 rooms and 40 kivas standing 5 stories tall. The precision of its construction, with walls aligning perfectly with the cardinal directions, hints at a deep astronomical knowledge. This celestial connection is made explicit at places like Fajada Butte, where a spiral petroglyph known as the sun dagger interacts with shafts of sunlight to mark the solstices and equinoxes with pinpoint accuracy. The Chacones were meticulous observers of the sky, and their entire landscape appears to have been orchestrated around cosmic cycles. The great roads, the alignment of buildings, and the positioning of sacred sites all suggest a culture that saw the patterns of the sun, moon, and stars as integral to their spiritual and physical world, guiding their ceremonies and their understanding of their place in the universe. Then, around 1300 CE, this vibrant, complex society underwent a radical and rapid transformation. Over the span of just a few decades, the magnificent cliff dwellings and the great pueblos of Choco Canyon were completely abandoned. The pottery-making ceased, the kivas fell silent, and the intricate roads were left to be erased by the desert winds. This was not a casual migration. It was a definitive and widespread departure from a homeland they had occupied for over 1,000 years. The question of why they left has puzzled researchers for generations, and the answer, as with so many lost civilizations, appears to be a confluence of factors that created an inescapable crisis. A prolonged and severe megadrought lasting several decades stands as the primary suspect. Tree ring data from the period reveals a devastatingly dry spell that gripped the region right at the time of the abandonment. For a culture living on the razor's edge of survival in an arid land, where successful agriculture depended on capturing every drop of unpredictable rainfall, this drought would have been catastrophic. Crops would have failed repeatedly, and the carefully managed water systems would have run dry, leading to widespread famine and thirst. The social contract, built on the ability of leaders to ensure food and stability, would have shattered under the strain. This environmental disaster was likely amplified by other pressures. Some archaeologists point to evidence of widespread deforestation, as the growing population needed ever more wood for construction and for firing the clay to make their pottery. This would have led to soil erosion, further reducing the land's ability to support agriculture. There are also tantalizing clues of social unrest and even violence. In some areas, defensive structures appear, and certain sites show evidence of conflict. It's possible that competition over dwindling resources fractured the once cooperative society, turning communities against each other. The most likely scenario is that a perfect storm of drought, environmental degradation, and social upheaval made their homeland unsustainable. The ancestral pueblones didn't vanish. They migrated south and east, joining existing communities and eventually evolving into the modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona, such as the Hopi and the Zuni, who carry on their cultural legacy to this day. Their departure from the cliff faces was not an end but a strategic retreat, a difficult decision to leave behind stone marvels that stand today as silent, haunting monuments to human resilience in the face of a changing world. Far to the south of the ancestral pueblones, in the stark river valleys that slice through the coastal desert of northern Peru, another civilization mastered an equally challenging environment with breathtaking skill, only to be broken by the very forces of nature they so deeply understood. This is the story of the Moch, a pre-Incan culture that flourished from approximately 100 to 800 CE. Creating a society of remarkable artistic achievement and monumental architecture, whose sudden demise reads like a biblical tale of plagues and punishment. The lifeblood of the Moch world was not a single river, but a series of them, carving fertile ribbons through one of the planet's most arid landscapes. They became hydraulic engineers without equal, constructing an extensive network of irrigation canals that funneled precious water from the rivers to vast fields of maize, beans, squash, and gourds. This mastery over water allowed them to transform the desert into a garden, supporting a population large enough to build impressive cities and sustain a complex social hierarchy with a powerful elite class of warrior priests. Their capital was likely a dual city complex with the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon dominating the landscape. The Huaca del Sol was a colossal adobe brick structure, once standing over 150 feet tall and containing an estimated 140 million bricks, many of them stamped with symbols identifying the labor groups that made them, a testament to a highly organized society. Where the Moch truly come alive for us today, however, is not in their bricks but in their art. They were arguably the finest metalworkers and ceramists of the ancient Americas. Their goldsmiths developed sophisticated techniques of gilding, soldering, and alloying to create stunning funerary masks, intricate nose ornaments, and ceremonial knives called tumes. But it is their pottery that provides an unparalleled window into their world. Moche artisans perfected a stirrup spout vessel, and they used this medium not for abstract designs but for breathtakingly realistic portraiture. They created vessels shaped into exquisitely detailed human heads, each with unique, individual features, scars, wrinkles, expressions of joy or contemplation, that feel like a glimpse of a real person from 2,000 years ago. Other vessels depict entire scenes from daily life and mythology, healers at work, warriors in battle, couples being intimate, and deities like the fanged decapitator god Ai-Apik. This was not merely decoration, it was a vivid, narrative art form that recorded their beliefs, their rituals, and their very identity. These rituals, as depicted on the pottery and revealed by archaeology, were often intense and violent, centered around concepts of sacrifice and reciprocity to appease the gods and ensure the life-giving flow of water. At the Huaca de la Luna, archaeologists have uncovered the grim evidence, the skeletons of dozens of young men, found in graves filled with the remains of other victims, their bones showing signs of brutal torture and systematic dismemberment. It appears they practiced a form of ritual combat where elites would engage in ceremonial battles and the losers were sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies. This was a sacred contract with the gods, a belief that the spilling of human blood was necessary to maintain the cosmic order and prevent environmental catastrophe. Tragically, their deepest fears may have ultimately become their reality. The evidence points to a series of climatic nightmares that shattered their world. Core samples taken from nearby lakes and glaciers reveal a pattern of intense weather disruptions coinciding precisely with the collapse of Moche society around the 6th century CE. The culprit was almost certainly a devastating sequence of El Niño events, the periodic warming of Pacific Ocean waters that can trigger extreme weather. The first phase would have been one of terrifying deluge. Instead of the usual steady trickle from the Andes, warm Pacific waters would have supercharged the atmosphere, sending torrential rains crashing into the coastal desert. Their sophisticated irrigation canals would have been utterly overwhelmed, turning into raging torrents that destroyed fields, washed away villages, and buried their adobe cities in massive mudslides. The Huaca del Sol itself was partially washed away during such an event, with nearly half the pyramid eroded by a catastrophic flood. This nightmare of water would have been swiftly followed by its opposite, a crippling, decades-long drought. After the El Niño pattern shifted, the region could have been plunged into an extended period of aridity. The rivers they depended on would have shrunk to a trickle, and their irrigation systems would have run dry. The result would have been widespread crop failure, famine, and social chaos. The very priests who had promised to control the weather through sacrifice were now powerless. Their entire religious and political framework, built on the premise of maintaining balance, would have collapsed under the weight of this ecological betrayal. It is likely that this environmental catastrophe sparked internal conflict. As resources vanished, the social order would have frayed. The once revered elite may have been overthrown by a desperate population. Some archaeologists point to evidence of huts being built on top of sacred plazas and palaces, suggesting a breakdown of the old order and a period of anarchy. The Moche civilization didn't just fade away, it was likely hammered into oblivion by a 1-2 punch of climatic extremes, first a flood that drowned their world, then a drought that starved it, leaving their magnificent huacas to melt slowly back into the desert from which they came. Emerging from the harsh, sun-baked deserts of what is now Jordan, the Nabateans crafted a legacy not of sprawling conquest, but of brilliant commercial mastery and breathtaking architectural audacity. Beginning as nomadic Arab tribes, they astutely recognized the immense value of the trade routes snaking through the barren landscape they called home. By the 4th century BCE, they had transformed themselves from wanderers into the undisputed lords of the desert, controlling the flow of incredibly valuable commodities between the great empires of the ancient world. Frankincense and myrrh, sacred resins harvested from trees in southern Arabia, were burned in temples across Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Spices, silks, and precious metals from India and the East all passed through their skilled hands. Their genius lay in their absolute command over the desert's most precious resource, water. In a land where a single day's journey without water could mean death, the Nabateans turned the desert into their fortress and their advantage. They established a network of way stations and small fortresses along the trade routes, but their true capital was a masterpiece of concealment and hydraulic engineering, the city of Petra. Tucked away in a remote canyon and accessible only through a narrow, winding gorge called the Sikh, this was a city designed for security and spectacle. The approach through the Sikh is an experience in dramatic tension, a mile-long pathway through towering, multicolored sandstone cliffs that builds anticipation until it finally opens up to reveal the city's most famous facade, Al-Khosneh, or the Treasury. This was not a treasury in the conventional sense, but an elaborately carved royal tomb, its Hellenistic-style columns and statues shimmering in the rose-red rock, a stunning declaration of Nabatean wealth and artistry. And this was just the beginning. The entire city was a monument carved directly into the living rock. They sculpted soaring temples, intricate tombs with classical pediments, and a massive theater capable of seating thousands, all by carefully removing stone from the cliff faces rather than building upwards. This rock-cut architecture was not merely for show, it provided natural insulation from the desert's extreme heat. Yet, the true wonder of Petra is hidden beneath the surface. To sustain a population of perhaps 20,000 people in the heart of a desert, the Nabateans engineered a water management system of unparalleled sophistication. They constructed an extensive network of terracotta pipes, channels, and dams that captured every precious drop of rainwater from the surrounding highlands. They carved hundreds of cisterns into the rock to store this water, and their system was so effective that it could provide an estimated 40 gallons of water per person per day, a surplus that allowed for lush gardens and even public fountains in the desert. This control over water was the foundation of their entire empire. It allowed them to offer rest and replenishment to wealthy trade caravans, for which they could charge handsome taxes and fees, amassing the fortune that built their spectacular city. This golden age of Nabatean independence and prosperity could not last forever in the face of an expanding Roman Empire. As Rome's influence grew in the Near East, it increasingly sought to bring the lucrative Arabian trade routes under its direct control. A series of confrontations and negotiations culminated in 106 CE, when the last Nabatean king, Rabble Roman II Soter, died. Rather than appoint a successor, the Roman Emperor Trajan peacefully annexed the kingdom, reorganizing it into the province of Arabia Patria. For a time, Petra continued to thrive under the Pax Romana. The Romans improved the roads, including the Via Nova Traiana, which ran through the region, and the city remained an important administrative center. However, this annexation marked the beginning of a long, slow decline. The very trade that had been the lifeblood of the Nabatean Empire began to change course. The Romans favored sea routes through the Red Sea and the newly discovered direct monsoon winds to India, which could carry goods more cheaply and in greater volume than the slow, arduous overland caravan journeys. While Petra was still connected, it was no longer the indispensable hub it once was. The city's importance gradually diminished over the subsequent centuries. A series of catastrophic blows then sealed its fate. In 363 CE, a powerful earthquake struck the region, destroying many of Petra's buildings and, more critically, crippling its intricate water management system. Without the expertise and organized labor of the Nabateans to maintain it, the system could not be fully restored. Later quakes caused further damage. As the Byzantine era gave way to the rise of Islam, the world's trade arteries had shifted decisively away from Petra. The city, once bustling with merchants from across the globe, was largely abandoned by the 7th or 8th century, except for a handful of local Bedouin tribes who used its caves for shelter and kept its memory alive as a legend. The magnificent capital faded into myth in the Western world, known only to the local people, until the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt famously rediscovered it in 1812, unveiling its rose-red splendors to a modern audience that could scarcely believe such a place existed. The Nabateans themselves didn't vanish. They were gradually absorbed into the wider Roman and later Arab cultural milieu, their unique identity dissolving into history, leaving behind the silent, majestic stone city as the ultimate testament to their ingenuity. Isolated in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, over 2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited shore, lies one of the most remote places on Earth, a place that became the stage for one of history's most poignant and cautionary tales of societal collapse. This is the story of the Rapa Nui, the Polynesian people who settled Easter Island, and whose rise and fall is etched into the landscape itself in the form of nearly 900 mysterious, towering stone figures, the moai. Theirs is a story of breathtaking ingenuity, profound spiritual belief, and ultimately, a tragic miscalculation that led their civilization to the brink of extinction long before the first European ever laid eyes on their shores. The achievement of the Rapa Nui people is nothing short of miraculous. Sometime around 1200 CE, according to most estimates, a small group of Polynesian voyagers, navigating by the stars and the patterns of the ocean in great double-hulled canoes, made landfall on this verdant subtropical island. They named it Te Pito o Te Henua, the navel of the world. What they found was a paradise rich with resources. The island was covered in a lush palm forest, home to the largest species of palm tree in the world, which provided wood for building homes, canoes, and tools. The forests were teeming with land birds, a vital source of food, and the surrounding waters offered a rich harvest of dolphins, tuna, and other seafood. It was in this environment of plenty that their unique culture took root and flourished. The centerpiece of their spiritual and social life was the cult of the moai. These were not merely statues, they were sacred repositories of spirit or mana, representing deified ancestors. The Rapa Nui believed that by carving and erecting a moai on a stone platform called an ahu, usually facing inland to watch over the living, they could channel the protective power and wisdom of their forebears into their communities. The process of their creation was a monumental undertaking that required a highly organized society. The moai were carved from compressed volcanic ash at a single quarry inside the crater of the Rono Raraku volcano. Using stone hand chisels called toki, teams of master craftsmen would painstakingly free the giant figures from the rock. The real engineering marvel, however, was the transport. How did a society without wheels, draft animals, or metal tools move statues weighing up to 80 tons across miles of rugged terrain? While the popular theory involving ropes and a rocking motion is well known, it was likely an incredibly complex operation involving a combination of log rollers, sledges, and a great deal of coordinated human labor, all fueled by the surplus food provided by the island's abundant ecosystem. This statue-building era represented a golden age, a time of fierce but mostly ritualistic competition between clans to erect larger and more elaborate moai, demonstrating their status and connection to the divine. But this period of prosperity and cultural efflorescence contained the seeds of its own destruction. As the population grew, perhaps reaching a peak of 15,000 people, the demand on the island's resources intensified. The clearest evidence of the ensuing catastrophe comes from paleobotanists who have studied pollen samples preserved in lake and swamp sediments. Their work reveals a terrifyingly clear timeline. The lush palm forest that once blanketed the island began to shrink and then disappear entirely, with the last tree pollen vanishing around the year 1600 CE. The trees were cut down for lumber to move the massive statues, for fuel, for canoe building, and to clear land for agriculture. This was a slow-moving ecological disaster that unfolded over generations, each one taking just a few more trees than the last until the unthinkable happened. There were none left. The consequences of this deforestation were catastrophic and cascading. Without trees, there was no wood to build seafaring canoes. The Rapa Nui, once master navigators of the open ocean, became trapped on their own island, unable to fish for the deep water species like dolphin that had been a protein staple. Soil erosion became a severe problem, as the tree roots that once held the fertile topsoil in place were gone, washing nutrients away and reducing agricultural yield. The loss of the forest also meant less firewood and fewer materials for shelter. The island's ecosystem, once robust and diverse, began to collapse. The evidence suggests that bird species went extinct on the island as their habitat vanished, eliminating another crucial food source. The paradise they had found was becoming a barren prison. As resources became desperately scarce, the social fabric tore apart. The very ancestor worship that had united them now became a source of bitter conflict. Clan turned against clan in a violent struggle for survival, toppling each other's moe in a symbolic act of destroying a rival's mana and source of power. The period known as the Huri Moe, the overturning of the statues, began. Archaeologists have found thousands of triangular, flaked obsidian spear points called matas scattered across the island, dating to this era of warfare. The old social order, centered on the lineage chiefs and the statue cult, completely broke down. Cave dwellings became common as people sought refuge from the violence, and some evidence even points to cannibalism emerging as a grim reality in the face of starvation. By the time the first European explorer, the Dutchman Jacob Roggeveen, arrived on Easter Sunday in 1722, he did not find a thriving, complex civilization. He encountered an impoverished, traumatized population of perhaps just 3,000 people, living in a deforested, impoverished landscape, surrounded by the toppled remnants of their former glory. The subsequent arrival of Peruvian slave raiders in the 1860s, who captured and removed over half the remaining population, and the introduction of European diseases, was a final, brutal blow to a society already teetering on the edge. The Rapa Nui civilization serves as a stark, microcosmic warning for our entire planet, a powerful reminder that no society, no matter how ingenious or spiritually rich, is immune to the consequences of exploiting its environment beyond the point of recovery. Their story is a haunting echo from a remote island, urging us to listen. While the Rapa Nui faced isolation, another lost civilization thrived at the very crossroads of continents, a formidable empire of innovation and martial might whose sudden erasure helped plunge the entire Mediterranean world into a dark age. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, in what is now Turkey, the Hittites forged an empire that, at its peak, stood as an equal to the kingdoms of Egypt and Babylon, a Bronze Age superpower whose secrets were so well kept that its very existence was nearly lost to history for 3,000 years. The heart of their domain was the massive capital city of Hattusa, a formidable fortress nestled in a rocky landscape. Unlike the open, planned cities of the Indus Valley, Hattusa was a city built for defense and imperial administration. Its walls were immense, constructed with gigantic, precisely fitted stone blocks that formed ramparts and towers. The city gates were guarded by colossal stone lions and sphinxes, projecting the power and majesty of the Hittite kings to all who approached. Within these walls lay a sprawling complex of temples, palaces, and vast above-ground granaries that could hold enough grain to sustain a population under siege for years. Perhaps most astonishing was the discovery of the Royal Archives, a library containing thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform. These tablets did not just record dry administrative details, they preserved peace treaties, legal codes, meticulous instructions for religious ceremonies, and even a fascinating plea from an Egyptian queen. It was through the decipherment of this treasure trove that the full stature and sophistication of the Hittite Empire was finally revealed to the modern world. Their military strength was the cornerstone of their power, and it was built upon a technological revolution. While they are often popularly credited with inventing ironworking, the reality is even more interesting. The Hittites were the first to systematically master the smelting and forging of iron on an industrial scale. During the Bronze Age, copper and tin, the components of bronze, were relatively scarce and controlled by a limited number of trade networks. Iron ore, by contrast, was far more common. The Hittites developed the advanced techniques needed to achieve the incredibly high temperatures required to smelt iron and carburize it into durable steel. This gave them a significant strategic advantage. They could produce greater quantities of reliable weapons, daggers, swords, and spearheads independent of the volatile tin trade. This technological edge, a closely guarded state secret, equipped their army with superior armaments and was a key factor in their ability to project power across the region. This military prowess was put to the ultimate test in one of the most famous battles of the ancient world. In 1274 BC, the Hittite king Muwatalli II clashed with the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II at the city of Kadesh. The battle involved tens of thousands of men and thousands of chariots, a scale of conflict unprecedented for its time. While the outcome was tactically indecisive, both sides claimed victory. It demonstrated the Hittites were a force that could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful empire on earth. The eventual result was not continued war, but the signing of the Treaty of Kadesh, a remarkable peace accord etched in silver. This document, copies of which were found in both Hattusa and Egypt, is the oldest known surviving peace treaty in human history, a testament to Hittite statecraft and their recognition as a legitimate great power by their rivals. Then, around 1200 BC, at the very height of their influence, the entire Hittite Empire imploded with terrifying speed. Hattusa, the impregnable capital, was not just abandoned, it was violently destroyed. Archaeologists have found layers of ash and burned debris covering the city, along with hastily buried hoards of precious objects, hidden by their owners who clearly intended to return but never did. The royal line vanished, the central government ceased to exist, and the Hittite language fell silent. This collapse was not an isolated event but part of a much wider catastrophe now known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period that saw the simultaneous fall of nearly every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean, from the Mycenaeans in Greece to the Empire of Ugarit in Syria. The search for a single cause for this system's collapse has proven elusive, pointing instead to a cascading failure brought on by multiple pressures. One major factor was almost certainly the movement of mysterious seafaring raiders known in Egyptian records as the Sea Peoples. These groups, whose origins are still debated, swept across the coastlines, attacking cities, disrupting the intricate international trade networks that were the lifeblood of Bronze Age economies, and perhaps even cutting off the Hittite heartland from its vital sources of grain in other territories. This external threat may have been compounded by internal rebellions. The Hittite Empire was a patchwork of conquered states and vassal kingdoms held together by the strength of the central monarchy. A period of weak rulers or succession disputes could have provided the spark for these subordinate peoples to rise up and break away. Perhaps the most compelling modern theory involves a severe, prolonged drought. Tree ring analysis and pollen studies from the region indicate a period of significant aridification and famine right at the time of the collapse. An empire built on a centralized distribution of grain like the Hittites would have been exceptionally vulnerable to a multi-year crop failure. Starvation would have led to mass migrations, social unrest, and the crippling of the army, making the empire a ripe target for both internal revolt and external invasion. It was likely this horrific combination climate change-induced famine, severing the economic and social bonds of the state, followed by waves of attacks from both the Sea Peoples and internal rebels. that delivered the killing blows. The mighty Hittite Empire, which had mastered iron and challenged pharaohs, fractured into small, isolated Neo-Hittite city-states that were soon absorbed by other powers, their imperial glory fading into a forgotten legend until patient archaeologists millennia later pieced together the story from the ashes of Hattusa. Far to the south of the Mediterranean powers, in the sun-scorched lands of what is now Sudan, a kingdom of immense power and sophistication rose to challenge the might of Egypt itself. This was the kingdom of Kush, and for centuries its rulers, the Black Pharaohs, actually sat on the throne of Egypt, governing a vast empire that stretched from the heart of Africa to the shores of the Mediterranean. But after their expulsion from Egypt, the Kushites did not fade away. Instead, they retreated south and forged a new, distinct identity, building a spectacular capital at Meroe that would become the engine of a civilization renowned for its wealth, its industry, and its fierce independence. The story of this later phase, often called the Meroitic period, begins around 800 BCE. After the Assyrians pushed the Kushite pharaohs out of Egypt, the kingdom's center of power shifted south along the Nile, eventually settling at Meroe. This new location was a stroke of strategic genius. Unlike their former capital at Napata, which was closer to the Egyptian border and its constant political turmoil, Meroe enjoyed several key advantages. It was situated at the confluence of several major trade routes that connected Central Africa with the Red Sea and the Mediterranean world. But more importantly, it was surrounded by a wealth of natural resources that their northern rivals could only dream of. The area was rich in gold, and the savanna woodlands surrounding the city provided the fuel for an industry that would become the backbone of their economy, iron production. The Kushites at Meroe became the iron masters of the ancient world. The landscape around the city is still littered today with enormous slag heaps, the waste product from their smelting, some towering over 30 feet high, a stark physical testament to the immense scale of their industrial operation. They mastered the complex process of heating local iron ore in massive furnaces, using the abundant wood from the acacia forests as fuel to create the blistering temperatures needed. This technological prowess allowed them to produce vast quantities of high-quality tools and, crucially, weapons. Their reputation as producers of superior iron goods spread far and wide, becoming a primary source of their wealth and military might. This industrial base supported a thriving artisan class that also produced exquisite pottery, intricate jewelry, and textiles traded across the ancient world. The most visible and iconic symbols of their power are the pyramids of Meroe. While inspired by their northern neighbors, the Meroitic pyramids are uniquely their own. They are smaller, steeper, and feature a distinctive offering chapel built against their eastern base, often decorated with elaborate carved reliefs. Over 200 of these steep-sided structures stand in neat rows across the desert, serving as the final resting places for the kings and queens of Kush. And it is the queens, known as Kandaks, who often steal the historical spotlight. These were not mere consorts, they were warrior queens and co-rulers who wielded immense power. Inscriptions and reliefs show them leading armies, offering to the gods, and governing alongside their husbands. One of the most famous, Queen Ammonionas, is celebrated for leading her forces against the Roman Empire after it annexed Egypt, launching a daring attack that resulted in the decapitation of a statue of Emperor Augustus, a head which was then buried beneath the steps of a Meroe temple as a supreme insult to Roman power. For centuries, Meroe thrived as a cosmopolitan hub, a cultural blender where African, Egyptian, and Hellenistic influences merged into something entirely new. They developed their own script, the Meroitic alphabet, which to this day remains only partially deciphered, locking away the intimate details of their court life, trade deals, and personal stories. Their pantheon of gods included both Egyptian deities like Ammon and Isis, as well as uniquely Nubian gods like the lion-headed Apedemak, a powerful warrior god. This cultural confidence allowed them to engage with the wider world as equals, trading with Rome, Greece, and Persia, and even sending ambassadors to the court of Augustus. Yet by the 3rd century CE, this vibrant, powerful kingdom was showing signs of strain. A series of interconnected pressures began to erode the foundations of the state. The first and perhaps most devastating was environmental. The climate of the region began to change, becoming increasingly arid. The savanna woodlands that had fueled the mighty iron industry and provided timber for construction gradually receded, giving way to the encroaching desert. This desertification would have crippled their primary industry and put immense pressure on agricultural land, leading to food shortages and a dwindling tax base for the royal treasury. This economic weakening occurred just as a new rival was rising to their southeast, the Kingdom of Aksum, located in the highlands of modern-day Ethiopia. Aksum was perfectly positioned to dominate the new maritime trade routes developing in the Red Sea. As Roman traders began sailing directly to India and the Horn of Africa using the monsoon winds, the old overland caravan routes that had been the lifeblood of Mara's economy became less relevant. Aksum, with its access to the port of Adulis, became the new middleman for trade between the Mediterranean and the African interior, slowly strangling Mara's commercial prosperity. The final blows were likely a combination of external aggression and internal fracture. Sometime around 350 CE, an Aksumite king named Ezana left an inscription boasting of a military campaign against the Kushites, though the exact nature of this conflict is still debated. It may have been a full-scale invasion that delivered the killing blow, or more likely, a raid against a kingdom already on its knees. There is also archaeological evidence of a royal palace in Mara being destroyed by fire, and some scholars suggest the final collapse may have been accelerated by a popular uprising against a ruling class that could no longer provide stability or prosperity. The people, suffering from famine and economic hardship, may have finally turned on their leaders. The kingdom of Kush did not vanish in a single dramatic event, but rather faded away, its power ebbing until it could no longer sustain itself as a unified state. The great iron furnaces grew cold, the pyramids were left to the sands, and the once powerful capital of Mara was abandoned, its secrets remaining locked in its undeciphered script, a silent monument to an African empire that once stood as a peer to the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. Now let's rewind the clock even further, to a time when glaciers still gripped much of the northern hemisphere, and the map of North America was a world of giants. This is the story of the Clovis culture, the continent's first widespread human society, a phenomenon that appeared with startling speed, left an unmistakable signature across the landscape, and then vanished just as abruptly, leaving behind one of prehistory's most enduring and hotly debated mysteries. The name Clovis comes from a single, spectacular archaeological find. In 1932, near the town of Clovis, New Mexico, archaeologists uncovered a trove of stone tools alongside the bones of an extinct species of mammoth. The tools were unlike anything seen before: elegant, leaf-shaped spear points with a unique and ingenious feature, a long, vertical flake or flute knocked out of the base on both sides. This fluting wasn't for decoration. It allowed the point to be securely hafted onto a wooden spear shaft, creating a deadly and reliable weapon system. This discovery was the key that unlocked a continent. As more sites were excavated, these distinctive Clovis points were found everywhere, from the Atlantic seaboard to the Pacific Northwest, and from the Canadian border down into northern Mexico. This wasn't an isolated tribe, it was a continent-wide technology, a cultural blueprint that appeared almost simultaneously across thousands of miles around 13,000 years ago. The sheer speed of this spread is astonishing, suggesting a highly adaptable and mobile population of big game hunters who had mastered their new world. And what a world it was! The North America the Clovis people inhabited is almost unimaginable to us today. It was a land of megafauna, a spectacular bestiary of creatures that would dwarf their modern relatives. Herds of woolly mammoths and giant mastodons, whose tusks curved like ancient tree trunks, roamed the grasslands. Towering over the bison was the giant short-faced bear, an apex predator that could stand 11 feet tall on its hind legs. There were ground sloths the size of modern cars, armored glyptodonts resembling enormous armadillos, and saber-toothed cats with teeth like daggers. For the Clovis hunters armed with their sophisticated spears, these animals represented the ultimate resource, a seemingly endless supply of meat, hide, and bone. Their campsites, often located near water sources where game would congregate, are littered with the remains of these magnificent beasts, testament to their incredible skill and specialization as hunters of the biggest game on Earth. Then, in a geological heartbeat, it all came crashing down. Around 12,800 years ago, the Clovis culture and the megafauna they hunted disappear from the archaeological record. The elegant fluted points are no longer made. The mammoth kill site ceased to exist. This moment in time coincides with the onset of a profound and sudden climatic event known as the Younger Dryas. The planet, which had been steadily warming since the end of the last ice age, was violently thrown back into a deep freeze. Global temperatures plummeted by up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit in just a few decades, a change that would have been catastrophically fast for the ecosystems and people living through it. Glaciers advanced again, and arid, dusty conditions replaced former grasslands. For the Clovis people, this would have meant the familiar migratory routes of their prey vanishing, water sources drying up, and a world transforming into a colder, harsher, and far less hospitable place almost overnight. The question of what caused this dramatic climate flip is at the heart of the Clovis mystery, and it has sparked one of the most intense scientific debates of our time. The most controversial theory proposes an extraterrestrial culprit. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that a fragmented comet or asteroid exploded in the atmosphere above North America or struck the continental ice sheet. This event, its proponents argue, would have generated a firestorm of unimaginable intensity, followed by a wave of superheated air that would have incinerated everything in its path. The resulting dust and soot thrown into the atmosphere would have blocked out the sun, creating an impact winter that triggered the Younger Dryas cooling. Evidence put forward for this includes a thin, dark layer of sediment at Clovis age sites across the continent that contains high levels of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in space rocks. Microscopic diamonds called nanodiamonds formed under immense pressure, and chunks of carbon that appear to be melted wildfire soot. If true, this would have been an apocalypse for the Clovis people, their hunting grounds scorched and their world plunged into an eternal winter. Yet many scientists remain deeply skeptical of the impact theory, pointing to difficulties in reproducing these findings and suggesting more earthly explanations. The traditional and widely accepted view is that the rapid climate change of the Younger Dryas itself was enough to destabilize the ecosystem. The sudden return to glacial conditions would have placed immense stress on the megafauna, altering their habitats and food sources. In this scenario, the Clovis people, who had become highly specialized hunters, simply found their primary food source collapsing beneath them. Their entire way of life was built around tracking and taking down massive creatures. When those creatures died out, their cultural identity and survival strategy may have died with them. A third, more nuanced theory combines climate change with human agency in what's known as the overkill hypothesis. Proponents argue that the Clovis people were simply too efficient. As they spread rapidly across a continent where animals had never encountered such a clever and determined predator, they may have hunted the slow-breeding megafauna to extinction. A species like the mammoth, which has a long gestation period and raises few young, would have been incredibly vulnerable to even low levels of hunting. When the added pressure of a rapidly shifting climate was thrown into the mix, it may have been the final push that sent these giant species over the edge. The collapse of their prey would have then inevitably led to the collapse of the Clovis culture itself. The truth likely lies in a combination of these factors. The Clovis people may have been the victims of a catastrophic perfect storm, a rapidly changing climate that was already stressing the megafauna populations, compounded by their own hunting prowess and possibly even capped by a devastating cosmic impact. Their disappearance wasn't an extinction but a transformation. The people themselves did not vanish from the continent, they adapted. In the centuries that followed, new, more regional archaeological cultures emerged, developing different styles of spear points and shifting their focus to a broader range of resources like smaller game and gathered plants. The unified Clovis blueprint gave way to a diverse tapestry of survival strategies, a necessary evolution in the face of a world that had fundamentally and terrifyingly changed. Their legacy is not one of failure, but of resilience, the first chapter in the human story of North America, written in stone and cut short by forces beyond their control. While the Clovis culture was mastering the hunt on a new continent, far across the Atlantic in the fertile lands of what is now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, another society was achieving a feat of social organization that would not be seen again in Europe for thousands of years. This is the story of the Cucuteni Tripilia culture, a Neolithic people who, for over 2 millennia, built some of the largest settlements on the face of the earth, creating a world of staggering scale and coordination that challenges everything we assume about prehistoric life. The sheer size of their communities is what first stuns the imagination. At a time when most of Europe was dotted with small villages of a few dozen people, the Tripilians were constructing vast planned metropolises. The largest of them all, near the modern city of Nebelivka in Ukraine, is estimated to have covered an astonishing 320 hectares, that's nearly 1 square mile, and may have housed up to 15,000 residents. To put that in perspective, the population of the ancient city of Uruk in Mesopotamia at its peak was around 40,000, but it took centuries to reach that size. The Tripilians were achieving this scale in the Stone Age over 5,000 years ago. These were not chaotic shanty towns, they were meticulously organized. Their settlements were laid out in concentric circles or ovals, with rows of houses radiating out from a central open plaza like the spokes of a wheel. The homes themselves were large, 2-story adobe structures, often divided into multiple rooms, with clay ovens for baking bread and cooking, and special platforms that likely served as ritual altars. This wasn't just a collection of houses, it was a deliberately planned urban environment, a testament to a level of social cohesion and collective purpose that is almost unparalleled in the prehistoric world. Yet the most baffling aspect of their culture is not how they built these cities, but what they did with them. Every 60 to 80 years, with a regularity that seems almost ritualistic, the Tripilians would deliberately set their entire settlement on fire and burn it to the ground. We know this was intentional because the fires were set from the inside, and the houses were often cleared of their valuable contents beforehand. After the conflagration, the community would not simply flee. They would carefully level the ashes and then rebuild their entire city, often on the exact same footprint, sometimes even replicating the layout of the previous community down to the placement of individual houses. This practice of periodic, controlled destruction is one of archaeology's greatest enigmas. What could possibly compel an entire society to engage in such a monumental, cyclical act of creation and annihilation? The theories are as fascinating as the practice itself. Some archaeologists see it as a profound religious or spiritual act, a form of ritual purification. The house was not just a shelter, it was a living entity imbued with the spirits of its inhabitants. Over generations, it would accumulate spiritual residue, both good and bad. By burning it, they were cleansing their world, releasing these spirits, and creating a tabula rasa for the next generation. It was a symbolic death and rebirth, a way of renewing their contract with the gods and the land. Others propose a more practical reason: pest control. These large, densely packed communities of wattle and daub structures would have been a paradise for vermin, insects, and parasites. A controlled hot fire would have sanitized the entire area, eliminating disease vectors and making the land safe for rebuilding. The truth may lie in a combination of both: a practical solution that was sanctified by ritual, a necessary renewal that was woven into the very fabric of their belief system. For all their organizational genius, the Trypillians left no evidence of a rigid, hierarchical social structure. There are no grand palaces, no enormous temples set apart from the common homes, and no opulent royal graves filled with treasure. This has led many scholars to propose that they were a strikingly egalitarian society, perhaps governed by council or through communal decision-making rather than a single chief or king. Their wealth was expressed not in gold or weapons, but in their breathtaking pottery. Trypillian artisans produced ceramics of extraordinary sophistication and beauty. They decorated their vessels with intricate, swirling patterns of spirals and coils, often using white, black, and red paints in a mesmerizing, rhythmic style that seems almost hypnotic. These designs are more than just decoration. They are a visual language, a complex symbolic code that we are only beginning to understand, representing their cosmology and their connection to the natural world. After flourishing for nearly 2,000 years, this stable, sophisticated culture began to fracture and fade around 3,500 BCE. Their massive settlements were gradually abandoned and the practice of cyclical burning ceased. The Cucuteni Trypillia culture didn't end with a bang, but with a slow, quiet dissolution. The mystery of their disappearance, much like their ritual burnings, has no single, simple answer. One compelling theory points to climate change. Paleoclimatological data suggests the region became colder and drier during this period, a shift that would have made the intensive agriculture needed to feed their massive populations increasingly difficult. A scarcity of resources could have forced the breakup of these large communities into smaller, more scattered groups. Another possibility is the arrival of new people from the steppes, the nomadic pastoralists known as the Yamnaya culture. These were a dramatically different people who used horses, wheeled carts, and were likely speakers of an early form of Indo-European language. They were also structured along more patriarchal and hierarchical lines. It's possible that a combination of environmental stress and the arrival of these new, assertive cultures led to a gradual cultural assimilation. The Trypillian way of life, built on fixed farming and immense communal projects, may have been absorbed and transformed by the more mobile, warrior-oriented steppe culture. They may not have been wiped out in an invasion, but rather their identity may have slowly melted away through intermarriage and the adoption of new technologies and social structures. The great concentric cities were left to the elements, their burned layers forming silent, fertile mounds tell settlements. That would keep the secret of Europe's first urban experiment buried for millennia. Leaving behind the vast, planned settlements of the Cucuteni Trypillia culture, our search for vanished civilizations now carries us to the heart of West Africa, to the rugged highlands of what is modern-day Nigeria. Here, flourishing in near-total obscurity for over 2 millennia, the Nok culture laid the foundational stones for some of Africa's greatest subsequent kingdoms. Emerging around 1500 BCE and enduring in some form until around 500 CE, the Nok are a civilization known to us almost exclusively through 2 breathtaking legacies: their mesmerizing, highly stylized terracotta sculptures and their pioneering mastery of iron smelting, a technological revolution that would reshape the continent. Their story is one of profound artistic spirit and technological innovation, yet it concludes with a disappearance so complete that their very name is a modern label, taken from the small village where the first evidence of their existence was accidentally uncovered. The discovery of the Nok was a stroke of pure chance. In 1943, a team of tin miners working near the village of Nok was digging through alluvial deposits when their tools struck something far more fragile and historically significant than ore. They unearthed a small, sculpted terracotta monkey head. This intriguing find sparked a wave of archaeological interest, and soon, dozens more terracotta fragments began to surface, not from careful excavation, but from erosion and the work of local farmers. These weren't crude, primitive figures. They were works of stunning sophistication and abstract beauty, revealing an artistic tradition that was entirely unknown to the wider world. The Nok had announced themselves not through written records or grand monuments, but through the silent, eloquent power of their art, and what art it is. Nok terracotta sculptures are instantly recognizable and utterly captivating. They primarily consist of human heads and figures, characterized by their highly stylized and geometric features. The heads are often large in proportion to the bodies, with distinctive triangular or almond-shaped eyes that are pierced, perhaps to allow heat to escape evenly during the firing process to prevent cracking, or possibly to hold decorative inlays of other materials that have since been lost. The lips are typically full and parted, and the hairstyles are elaborate and intricate, arranged in elaborate buns, knots, and coils that speak to a complex culture with a deep sense of personal adornment and identity. These are not generic portraits. Each face possesses a unique expression, a sense of individual character that feels both ancient and startlingly modern. The figures often depict people in postures of authority or reverence, adorned with jewelry like beads, bracelets, and anklets, suggesting a society with a clear social hierarchy and a rich ceremonial life. The technical skill required to create such large, hollow sculptures, some nearly life-sized, and fire them without shattering in open pits indicates a generation's deep knowledge of ceramic arts that was unparalleled in the region at the time. Yet, their ingenuity was not confined to clay. Around the middle of their cultural timeline, around 500 BC, the Nok made a leap that would change the course of West African history forever. They began to smelt iron. At a site known as Taruga, archaeologists have found the most compelling evidence: clay tires, the nozzle-like pipes used to blast air into a furnace alongside iron tools and slag, the waste product from the smelting process. This discovery is monumental because it places the Nok among the very earliest ironworkers, not just in Africa, but in the entire world. The ability to produce iron independently was a transformative technology. Iron axes and hoes would have allowed them to clear forests and till tough soils far more efficiently than with stone tools, leading to an agricultural surplus that could support a larger, more complex society. Iron weapons like spearheads and arrowheads would have conferred significant military advantages. This technological prowess suggests the Nok were not a scattered collection of villages, but likely a well-organized society with specialized artisans and a degree of centralized control over valuable resources and knowledge. This makes their ultimate fate all the more puzzling. Sometime after 500 CE, the distinct cultural markers of the Nok begin to fade from the archaeological record. The production of their iconic terracotta sculptures ceases entirely. The iron smelting sites fall silent. It is as if the vibrant cultural flame that had burned for 2,000 years was suddenly snuffed out. There is no evidence of a violent end, no layers of ash from sacked villages, no mass graves indicative of a massacre or epidemic. Instead, the disappearance appears to have been a gradual process of cultural diffusion and assimilation. The most widely accepted theory points to a dramatic shift in the climate. Paleo-environmental studies suggest that the region experienced a gradual but relentless desiccation, a move towards a much drier and less predictable climate. The lush savanna woodlands that had sustained their agriculture and provided the charcoal needed for both their terracotta kilns and iron furnaces may have begun to recede. This desertification would have placed unbearable strain on their way of life, forcing communities to disperse into smaller, more mobile groups in search of reliable water and arable land. As they fragmented, their complex social structure, which supported the specialized artists and blacksmiths, would have dissolved. The knowledge and tradition of creating the large, elaborate terracottas may have simply become unsustainable in a world of increasing scarcity. This environmental pressure likely catalyzed a process of cultural absorption. The Nok people did not vanish. They almost certainly became part of the genetic and cultural fabric of the region. Their descendants are likely the people who went on to build the later, famous kingdoms of West Africa, such as Ife and Benin, which are also renowned for their magnificent artistic traditions in terracotta and bronze. The technological seed of ironworking, first planted by the Nok, spread throughout the continent, becoming a cornerstone of succeeding societies. The Nok culture disappeared not in a catastrophic collapse, but through a quiet metamorphosis, its unique identity slowly blending into the emerging cultures around it, leaving behind only those enigmatic, beautiful sculptures as a timeless testament to their genius. From the enigmatic terracotta masterpieces of the Nok, we now sail to the azure waters of the Persian Gulf, to a civilization whose very name was synonymous with paradise and prosperity in the ancient world. This is the story of Dilmun, a legendary Bronze Age society that flourished as a vital trade hub from around 3000 to 500 BCE, centered on the islands of Bahrain and the adjacent Arabian coast. In the epic poetry of the Sumerians, Dilmun was described as a pure, clean, and bright land, a place where sickness and death were unknown and where fresh waters mingled with the salt sea. It was the sacred meeting point of the gods, a paradise that some scholars believe may have even influenced later biblical tales of Eden. But Dilmun was far more than a myth. It was a very real and incredibly wealthy commercial crossroads, a linchpin in the first globalized trade network, whose gradual fade into obscurity is a classic tale of a world transformed by forces beyond its control. The lifeblood of Dilmun's prosperity was its strategic location. Situated midway between the two great river valley civilizations of Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, Dilmun's merchants became the essential middlemen of the Bronze Age. Their distinctive, sturdy, circular stamped seals have been found from Ur to Mohenjo-Daro, marking their presence across the known world. From the great cities of Sumer, they would transport wool, leather, and most importantly, barley and silver. Sailing southeast, they would trade these goods for the incredible luxuries of the Indus Valley. Intricately carved ivory combs, precious woods, vibrant cotton textiles, and brilliant carnelian beads. But perhaps their most famous and vital trade was in copper. While Mesopotamia itself was resource-poor, the ore-rich mountains of Oman, known in ancient times as Magan, were a primary source of this essential metal, the very backbone of the Bronze Age. Dilmunite ships controlled this traffic, hauling tons of raw copper ingots north to the foundries of Ur and Lagash, where they would be alloyed with tin to produce the weapons, tools, and prestige goods that powered these early empires. This lucrative trade did not just fill the coffers of merchants, it built a sophisticated and complex society on the main island of Bahrain. The most striking testament to their wealth and social structure is found in their necropolises. The landscape of Bahrain is still dominated by the Dilmun burial mounds, a vast city of the dead that once contained over 170,000 individual tombs. These are not simple graves. Many are imposing, tower-like mounds with distinctive alcoves and chambers, built from finely cut limestone blocks. The sheer scale of this construction, which continued for centuries, points to a large, stable, and highly organized population with the resources to invest profoundly in the afterlife. The contents of the richer mounds tell a story of a society connected to a wider world. Gold jewelry, copper weapons, and those distinctive Indus Valley carnelian beads, all status symbols for a wealthy elite that derived its power from international commerce. At the heart of their civilization was their capital city, now known as Kalat al-Bahrain. This was a fortified port settlement, a bustling entrepot where goods from Mesopotamia, Iran, Oman, and the Indus Valley were unloaded, taxed, and traded. Archaeological excavations have revealed a massive, monumental complex of storerooms, administrative buildings, and public works, all protected by massive defensive walls that were expanded and reinforced over generations. The presence of thousands of clay tablets and seals confirms this was a centralized mercantile state with a sophisticated bureaucracy that recorded transactions, tracked inventories, and managed the flow of wealth. This was not a passive stop on a trade route. It was a mercantile powerhouse that actively controlled and profited from the arteries of ancient globalization. So what happened to this wealthy, well-connected paradise? Its decline was not sudden, but a slow ebbing away of influence over several centuries, driven by a combination of economic and environmental shifts. The first major blow was the spectacular and mysterious collapse of their primary trading partner to the east, the Indus Valley Civilization, around 1900 BC. With the fall of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the demand for Mesopotamian goods in the east dried up, and the flow of luxurious Indus commodities into the Gulf slowed to a trickle. This instantly devalued Dilmun's role as a middleman, cutting off a primary source of its wealth and prestige. While the Dilmunites adapted, finding new markets and goods, the world around them was changing in ways that would ultimately seal their fate. By the first millennium BC, new naval technologies and a better understanding of monsoon wind patterns gave rise to more direct trade routes. Larger, more seaworthy ships began bypassing the Persian Gulf altogether, sailing directly from Mesopotamian ports out into the Indian Ocean to trade with India and beyond. Dilmun was no longer an essential stopping point. It was becoming a historical detour. This economic marginalization was likely accompanied by environmental pressure. As a society dependent on trade and agriculture in an arid environment, changes in freshwater availability would have been catastrophic. There is evidence that the island's natural springs, a legendary feature that gave Dilmun its paradisiacal reputation, may have begun to falter due to shifting water tables or climatic changes, reducing agricultural output and making the island less self-sufficient. Finally, a new imperial power arose that viewed Dilmun not as a partner but as a possession. The ascendant Neo-Assyrian Empire, in its relentless drive to control all sources of wealth, began to exert its dominance over the Gulf. Royal inscriptions from Assyrian kings list Dilmun as a tributary state, a far cry from its former status as an independent economic powerhouse. By around 600 BC, the region was fully absorbed into the burgeoning Neo-Babylonian and later Achaemenid Persian empires. Dilmun lost its political independence and unique cultural identity, becoming just another provincial satrapy in a vast continental empire. The great burial mounds fell out of use, the bustling port of Kalat al-Bahrain diminished in importance, and the memory of the legendary land of Dilmun retreated from the world stage, surviving only in ancient Sumerian epics, waiting for archaeologists to unearth the truth behind the myth of the paradise in the Gulf. As we continue our exploration of vanished worlds, we journey back to a time even before the great pyramids of Egypt were a glimmer in a pharaoh's eye, to the fertile river valleys of the Balkans. Here, a Neolithic culture emerged with a sophistication that continues to astonish archaeologists, challenging our perceptions of prehistoric Europe. This is the story of the Vincha culture, a society that thrived for over 1,000 years, from around 5,700 to 4,500 BC, across what is now Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and parts of Hungary and Bosnia. Their legacy is one of remarkable urban planning, precocious technological innovation, and a collection of cryptic symbols that has sparked one of archaeology's most enduring debates. Did they invent the first writing system? The sheer scale of their settlements immediately sets the Vincha apart from their contemporaries. While most of Europe was home to small, scattered villages, the Vinci built what can only be described as proto-cities. Their largest site, Vinci below Brdeo, just outside modern-day Belgrade, is an enormous tell settlement, an artificial mound formed by centuries of human habitation that stands over 10 meters tall and covers hectares of land. Excavations reveal a densely packed community of rectangular houses built with sophisticated wattle and daub construction, organized along planned streets and pathways. These were not temporary shelters but substantial, long-term dwellings, complete with sturdy wooden frames, clay-plastered walls, and specialized hearths for cooking and heating. The size and organization of these settlements suggest a highly structured society, capable of coordinating large-scale labor and supporting a population dense enough to require complex social rules and hierarchies. Life in these communities was surprisingly advanced. They crafted exquisite pottery fired in kilns, used looms for weaving textiles, and created a vast array of tools and figurines from bone, stone, and clay. Their technological prowess extended into a realm that would define the future of humanity, metallurgy. The Vinci people are among the very first humans on Earth to have smelted copper. At sites like Plochnik, archaeologists have discovered compelling evidence of this revolutionary technology, including copper tools, ornamental pins, and crucibles, the fire-resistant containers used for melting metal ore. The temperatures required to smelt copper are significant, around 1084 degrees Celsius, indicating a sophisticated understanding of pyrotechnology far beyond simple pottery kilns. This was not just a casual experimentation, it was a deliberate, mastered process. This discovery places the Vinci at the forefront of the metallurgical age in Europe, centuries before this knowledge became widespread. Their ability to transform rock into malleable, useful metal represents a quantum leap in human technological evolution, granting them superior tools and undoubtedly conferring significant social and economic power to those who controlled this knowledge. Yet, the most captivating and contentious aspect of the Vinci culture is not their metal or their towns, but a series of mysterious symbols found inscribed on pottery, spindle whorls, and clay figurines. These are the so-called Vinci symbols, a collection of over 100 distinct signs including crosses, chevrons, meanders, and star-like patterns that appear consistently across a wide geographical area and over several centuries. To the untrained eye, they look like simple potter's marks or decorative motifs. However, their standardized nature and repetitive use have led some prominent archaeologists and linguists to propose a far more radical theory: that this was a nascent proto-writing system. If true, this would make it one of the oldest forms of symbolic communication in the world, predating the earliest Sumerian cuneiform by over 1,000 years. The idea is tantalizing, a lost script from Neolithic Europe that could potentially encode a language, beliefs, or commercial records. Proponents argue that the consistency and complexity of the symbols go far beyond mere decoration, suggesting a system of information storage and transmission. The academic community remains deeply divided on this interpretation. Skeptics counter that the symbols lack the crucial element of a true writing system. They show no evidence of a phonetic value where signs represent specific sounds of a spoken language. There is no Rosetta Stone for the Vinci, no bilingual text to act as a key. The inscriptions are also frustratingly short, never arranged in long, linear sequences that would suggest a narrative or a detailed record. They may have served as sacred symbols, marks of ownership, clan identifiers, or a form of ritual notation understood only by a privileged few within their society. Whether it was a true script or an elaborate system of symbols, its meaning is locked away, a silent language that continues to guard the innermost thoughts of this ancient people. This ambiguity only deepens the mystery surrounding them, presenting a cliffhanger that may never be fully resolved. After a millennium of stability and innovation, the vibrant Vinci culture began to fade. Their large settlements were gradually abandoned, their distinct pottery styles vanished, and their cultural practices were supplanted. The cause of their decline appears to be a classic case of a civilization succumbing to a combination of internal strain and external pressure. Paleoclimatological data suggests the region experienced a shift towards a cooler, drier climate during this period. This change could have led to poorer agricultural yields, putting stress on the large, concentrated populations that define the Vinca way of life. Scarcity of resources often leads to social unrest and a breakdown of the complex systems that hold a society together, potentially causing these proto-cities to fracture into smaller, more mobile groups. This period of vulnerability coincided with the arrival of new people on the scene. The migration of pastoralist groups from the Eurasian steppes, likely early Indo-European speakers. These newcomers, with their different social structures, technologies, and possibly more mobile, horse-assisted lifestyle, would have presented a significant cultural challenge. The evidence does not point to a violent invasion and conquest. Instead, it suggests a long process of cultural absorption and assimilation. The Vinca people likely did not disappear. They gradually intermarried with and were integrated into these new communities, their unique identity slowly dissolving over generations. Their knowledge of metallurgy and other technologies almost certainly lived on, passed down and adapted by their successors. The Vinca culture vanished not with a bang but through a quiet transformation, its people blending into the tapestry of European prehistory, leaving behind their enigmatic symbols and the buried foundations of Europe's first towns as a testament to their forgotten brilliance. Now we travel east to the heart of China's Sichuan Basin, a landscape of misty mountains and fertile plains that was once home to a civilization so bizarre and artistically audacious that its discovery utterly upended the entire narrative of Chinese history. This is the story of the Sangsingdui civilization, a culture that thrived in glorious isolation from around 1200 to 1000 BCE, creating a world of breathtaking bronze artistry that bears no resemblance to the more familiar Shang dynasty to the north. Their legacy, hidden for 3,000 years, is a collection of artifacts so strange, so hypnotically otherworldly, that they seem less like archaeological finds and more like relics from a lost alien planet. The discovery of Sangsingdui was a moment of pure, earth-shattering serendipity. In 1986, workers at a brick factory near the city of Guanghan were digging for clay when their shovels struck something hard and metallic. What they unearthed was not just a few pottery shards, but two enormous sacrificial pits overflowing with treasures that defied all explanation. Archaeologists rushed to the scene and were met with a sight that must have seemed like a dream. The pits were not simple graves. They were carefully constructed vaults containing hundreds of objects, all crafted from gold, bronze, jade, and ivory. But these were not the familiar ritual vessels and ceremonial axes of the Shang. Instead, they pulled out a universe of the surreal, towering bronze trees with birds and dragons, life-sized statues with hands clenched in an eternal gesture of power, colossal masks with dragon-like protruding pupils, and a stunning gold scepter depicting human heads amid birds and fish. It was an artistic Big Bang, a cultural universe with no discernible evolutionary precursor, appearing fully formed in the archaeological record. The most iconic and haunting creations of the Sangsingdui are without a doubt the bronze masks and heads. These are not realistic portraits, they are abstractions of power, visions of the divine or the supernatural. Many of the masks are enormous, some over a meter wide, with grotesquely exaggerated features, massive, bat-like ears that seem to strain to hear celestial whispers, eyes that are either wide, almond-shaped orbs or, most strikingly, extruded like cylinders or telescopes, giving them an almost insectoid, otherworldly appearance. The largest of these, the nearly 4-foot-wide spirit mask, is a terrifying and magnificent vision, its eyes projecting like twin cannons, suggesting a being capable of seeing across worlds or into the souls of humans. The human heads are equally arresting, with angular features, sharp, downward-turned mouths, and often covered in gold leaf or painted with black pigment. Some have mysterious, square perforations on their foreheads, perhaps for attaching additional ceremonial decorations like feathers or wooden antlers. Every piece feels like a direct conduit to a spiritual realm that was radically different from anything known in contemporaneous China. This profound artistic divergence points to a civilization that developed in complete isolation, cut off from the central plains of China by the treacherous mountain ranges surrounding the Sichuan Basin. While the Shang dynasty was perfecting its intricate rituals of ancestor worship and casting its iconic Ding cauldrons, the Sanxingdui were forging their own unique path, guided by a shamanistic and animistic religion that venerated the sun, birds, and eyes, symbols of vision and celestial power. The absence of any writing at the site makes their beliefs even more enigmatic. We have no text to explain the meaning behind the staring eyes or the towering bronze sacred tree, which at nearly 4 meters tall is thought to represent a ladder between heaven and earth, a cosmic axis where shaman priests could communicate with the gods. They were a society ruled by a powerful theocratic elite, these very priests who wore the colossal masks in rituals, transforming themselves into vessels for divine power to awe and guide their people. And then, around 1000 BC, it all stopped. The sophisticated metropolis, which covered an area of nearly 4 square miles and was protected by massive walls and a sophisticated irrigation system, was abandoned. Most mysteriously of all, their entire corpus of sacred art, every mask, every head, every tree, was systematically ritualized. The objects were carefully arranged in the pits, but they had been deliberately broken, burned, and then buried in a thick layer of ash. This was not the result of a hasty invasion or a panicked flight. It was a conscious, ceremonial act of closure. The society that had created these masterpieces chose to decommission them, to take them out of circulation in a final, profound ritual. The question of why they did this and why their entire civilization vanished remains one of Asia's greatest archaeological puzzles. The leading theory points to a catastrophic natural disaster. The Sichuan Basin sits on a major seismic fault line, and geological evidence suggests a massive earthquake around the time of the collapse. Such an event could have triggered devastating landslides that blocked the region's life-giving rivers like the Minjiang. This would have caused catastrophic flooding upstream and crippling drought downstream, destroying the agricultural base of the society in one fell swoop. The Sanxingdui people, seeing their world shattered by what they interpreted as the wrath of the gods, may have performed a final, desperate ritual, burying their most sacred objects to appease the angry deities before abandoning their holy city forever. Some scholars speculate that the survivors may have migrated and eventually merged with another emerging culture in the region, perhaps becoming the founders of the later, similarly mysterious Shu kingdom, whose artifacts show some stylistic echoes of Sanxingdui's grandeur. But the unique, brilliant flame of Sanxingdui itself was extinguished, its secrets buried in ash and clay until a chance discovery by brickworkers unveiled a lost chapter of human creativity that continues to astonish and mystify the world. High in the cloud-shrouded peaks of Colombia's Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, a mountain range that rises straight from the Caribbean coast to snow-capped heights of over 18,000 feet, a remarkable civilization carved out a life of breathtaking sophistication and spiritual depth. This was the world of the Tairona, a culture that flourished from around 200 CE until the Spanish arrival in the 16th century, building spectacular stone cities that seemed to merge organically with the dramatic mountain landscape. Their story is one of incredible resilience and engineering genius, a society that thrived in isolation only to be shattered by the forces of a world it never asked to meet. The Tairona's mastery of their environment is their most enduring legacy. They transformed the steep, rugged slopes of the Sierra Nevada into a terraced, productive paradise. Using a system of stone retaining walls, they created flat platforms for their homes and for agriculture, preventing soil erosion and managing the torrential tropical rains that sweep across the mountains. But their true architectural marvel was their network of stone-paved pathways. These were not simple trails, they were sophisticated roads often several feet wide, expertly engineered with drainage channels, steps, and retaining walls. This vast web of roads connected a series of sizable towns and hundreds of smaller villages across the range, allowing for the movement of goods, people, and ideas across an incredibly difficult terrain. The largest and most famous of these cities, known today as Ciudad Perdida or the Lost City, is a stunning testament to their urban planning. Accessed by a grueling climb up 1,200 stone steps, the city reveals itself as a complex of circular stone terraces, plazas, and ceremonial centers, all nestled into the jungle-covered mountainside and interconnected by a labyrinth of staircases and paved streets. It was a metropolis designed in harmony with the mountain, a feat of landscape engineering that commands awe even today. This physical sophistication was matched by their artistic and spiritual achievements. The Tairona are celebrated as some of the finest goldsmiths of the ancient Americas. Working with alloys like tumbaga, a mix of gold and copper, they created exquisite objects not for personal wealth but for sacred purposes. Their pendants, often depicting shamans transformed into powerful beasts like jaguars, bats, or eagles, were worn during religious ceremonies to facilitate a connection with the spirit world. They crafted intricate paporos, lime containers used in the ritual chewing of coca leaves, which were elaborately decorated with anthropomorphic figures and intricate geometric patterns. This coca ritual was not recreational. It was a central part of Tairona spirituality, a way for their priests, the mamas, to access higher states of consciousness, communicate with the ancestors, and maintain the balance of the universe. Their art, therefore, was a direct expression of a profound cosmological belief system, one that saw humanity as an integral part of a living, sacred world. For centuries, this complex society thrived in its mountain fastness, largely protected by the sheer difficulty of the terrain. But their isolation could not protect them from the tidal wave of change that arrived with the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century. Initial contacts were violent but inconclusive. The Tairona fiercely defended their territory, and the Spanish found the mountains a formidable barrier. However, the true weapons that would destroy the Tairona civilization were not swords and muskets, but ones the Europeans carried unintentionally: smallpox, measles, and influenza. Having no immunity to these old-world diseases, the Tairona population was decimated. It's estimated that up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas died from these epidemics, and the Tairona, living in densely populated communities, would have been tragically vulnerable. Wave after wave of disease swept through their cities, killing countless people and utterly crippling their social and economic structures. The Spanish followed this biological catastrophe with a campaign of relentless violence and oppression. Attracted by rumors of the Tairona's magnificent gold work, they launched repeated expeditions into the Sierra Nevada. While they never found the legendary city of gold, El Dorado, they did find a broken people. The surviving Tairona were subjected to forced labor. Their sacred gold objects were melted down into ingots and shipped to Spain, and they were violently pressured into converting to Christianity. In a final, crushing blow, the Spanish authorities initiated a policy of forced relocation, uprooting the remaining Tairona from their ancestral mountain cities and moving them into new, consolidated towns on the lower slopes where they could be more easily controlled and exploited. Uprooted from the spiritual heart of their world, their social fabric torn apart by disease and violence, the Tairona civilization as a coherent political entity collapsed. Their magnificent stone cities were abandoned to the jungle, which quickly swallowed them, hiding their existence from the outside world for centuries. But the story does not end there. It is believed that some Tairona communities managed to resist relocation, retreating even higher into the most remote and inaccessible reaches of the Sierra Nevada. There, they preserved their way of life, their language, and their spiritual beliefs in isolation. Many anthropologists and the indigenous people themselves believe that the modern Kogi people are the direct descendants of these Tairona survivors. The Kogi, who call themselves the elder brothers of humanity, have maintained a deeply traditional existence guided by their spiritual leaders, the Mamas, who are trained from birth in a dark cave to understand the sacred laws of nature. They emerge with a profound mission to warn their younger brothers, the rest of humanity, that our exploitation of the natural world is throwing the earth dangerously out of balance. For the Kogi, the lost cities of their ancestors are not ruins to be excavated. They are Tayuna, the sacred heart of a living territory, a place where the spiritual and physical worlds connect. The collapse of the Tairona civilization was not an extinction, but a metamorphosis, a retreat into the heights to guard an ancient wisdom, a poignant reminder from the past urging us to listen to the guardians of the world we are so carelessly endangering. From the misty peaks of the Tairona, we now journey to the sun-baked highlands of the Horn of Africa, where a kingdom of immense power and sophistication rose to control the crossroads of continents. This is the story of the Kingdom of Axum, a civilization that from approximately 100 to 940 CE dominated trade between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, erected some of the most staggering monoliths the ancient world ever produced, and became one of the first great Christian states, only to see its influence wane into near myth. The ascent of Axum was built upon a foundation of brilliant commercial strategy. Its capital city, also called Axum, was perfectly situated in the highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. This location was not an accident, it was the strategic heart of a vast commercial network. From this highland stronghold, the Axumites controlled access to the Red Sea, with the port of Adulis serving as their bustling gateway to the world. Here, the wealth of two hemispheres converged. Massive merchant ships from the Roman Empire and later Byzantium would arrive, bearing goods like wine, glassware, olive oil, and manufactured metals. From the east, ships from India and Sri Lanka brought spices, precious gems, Chinese silk, and steel. And from the African interior, camel caravans laden with ivory, gold, exotic animal skins, and enslaved people completed this vibrant exchange. The Axumite kings grew incredibly wealthy from taxing this flow of commerce, minting their own distinctive gold, silver, and copper coins. The first sub-Saharan African kingdom to do so, which have been found as far away as India, a testament to their economic reach. This immense wealth found its most awe-inspiring expression in stone. The Axumites were master stonemasons, and their signature achievement was the construction of monumental granite obelisks or stelae. These were not merely pillars, they were funerary monuments for their kings and nobles, and they represented multi-story buildings carved from a single piece of rock. The tallest of these, the Great Stele, is believed to have stood over 100 feet tall before it collapsed. What remains today is still staggering. The stele are intricately carved to resemble towering buildings, complete with false doors at their base, rows of windows, and even the ends of wooden beams projecting from the sides. The engineering feat of quarrying, transporting, and erecting these multi-hundred-ton stones without the use of wheels or pulleys remains a profound mystery. They were likely moved on log rollers by thousands of workers and raised into position using a complex system of ramps and counterweights, a breathtaking display of collective effort and royal power intended to project the kingdom's majesty for eternity. Perhaps the most transformative moment in Axum's history was its conversion to Christianity in the 4th century CE. According to tradition, a young Syrian philosopher named Frumentius was shipwrecked on the Axumite coast. He found his way to the royal court and eventually became the tutor to the young prince Ezana. When Azana ascended to the throne, Frumentius traveled to Alexandria and appealed to the patriarch to send a bishop back to Axum. He returned as Bishop Selama, and under his guidance, King Azana officially adopted Christianity, making Axum only the second state in the world after Armenia to do so. This was not a superficial change, it fundamentally reshaped Axumite identity. The old gods and the crescent moon symbol on their coins were replaced with the cross. They built magnificent churches, the most sacred of which is the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, which today is said to house the biblical Ark of the Covenant. This early adoption of Christianity connected Axum spiritually and diplomatically to the powerful Byzantine Empire, creating a strong alliance against their common enemy, the pagan Persian Empire to the east. For centuries, Axum seemed invincible, a peer to Rome, Persia, and China. Its king even styled himself the King of Kings. Yet by the 8th century, this powerful state was in an irreversible decline, and by the 10th century, its political power had effectively collapsed. The causes were numerous and interconnected, creating a perfect storm that the kingdom could not weather. One major factor was environmental. Paleoclimatological evidence suggests the region experienced a pronounced and prolonged drought. This would have devastated the agricultural base that fed the population and supported the army, leading to famine and social unrest. Centuries of intensive farming to support the urban population also likely led to severe soil exhaustion and erosion, further reducing crop yields and crippling the economy from within. At the same time, Axum's greatest asset, its control over trade, was ruthlessly stolen. The rise of Islam in the 7th century radically redrew the geopolitical map of the region. As the new Islamic Caliphate rapidly expanded, it seized control of the Red Sea and the Nile Valley, effectively landlocking the Christian kingdom of Axum and cutting it off from its primary trading partners in the Byzantine Empire. The new Muslim powers now favored trade routes through the Persian Gulf, bypassing Axum entirely. The Axumite port of Adulis, once throbbing with commercial activity, silted up and was eventually abandoned. The kingdom was pushed into the highlands, economically isolated and stripped of the international commerce that had been the very source of its power and prestige. There is also a traditional account recorded in later Ethiopian histories of a devastating invasion by a ferocious, powerful Jewish queen named Judith, who is said to have burned churches, destroyed the stelae, and overthrew the Axumite dynasty. While the historical evidence for Judith is thin, it may be a folk memory of a very real period of violent internal rebellion or an external attack that delivered the final blow to an already crippled state. The kingdom of Axum did not vanish, but it did shrink, its power contracting until it transformed into the medieval Ethiopian Empire, which preserved its Christian faith but could never recapture the vast international glory of its Axumite predecessor. The great stelae were left toppled, the capital city dwindled, and the once mighty King of Kings became a remote legend, his story waiting centuries to be unearthed. While the Axumites were trading across continents, a world away in the heart of North America, another civilization was reaching a staggering scale of its own, not in stone but in earth. This is the story of the Mississippian culture, a sophisticated network of Native American societies that, between 800 and 1600 CE, transformed the fertile river valleys of the eastern United States into a landscape of monumental engineering and complex political power, building some of the largest earthen structures on the planet, only to see their greatest cities fall. Silent generations before European ships ever appeared on the horizon, the most breathtaking testament to their ambition is the great city of Cahokia. Located directly across the Mississippi River from modern-day St. Louis, Cahokia was the unquestionable apex of Mississippian civilization and a genuine metropolitan hub. At its peak around 1100 CE, it sprawled across nearly 6 square miles and supported a population of 10 to 20,000 people, with another 20 to 30,000 living in the surrounding farmsteads and villages. In an era when London was a cramped, muddy town of perhaps 15,000 souls, Cahokia was one of the largest cities in the world. The skyline of this ancient American metropolis was dominated not by buildings of stone, but by more than 120 hand-built earthen mounds. The largest of these, the colossal Monk's Mound, is a truly awe-inspiring feat of engineering. It is the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Americas north of Mexico, rising 100 feet high and covering 14 acres at its base, a footprint larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its construction was a staggering communal effort, requiring the movement of an estimated 14 million baskets of soil, each weighing around 60 pounds, all carried on the backs of people using woven baskets. This was not a random pile of dirt. It was a precisely engineered, four-terraced platform that supported a massive ceremonial structure, likely the residence of the city's paramount chief, who ruled from this elevated position, both physically and spiritually above the city he governed. Cahokia was far more than just a collection of mounds. It was a meticulously planned cosmological center. At its heart lay a vast 40-acre grand plaza, a leveled field that could have accommodated tens of thousands of people for public gatherings, religious ceremonies, and games of chunky, a popular sport involving rolling stone discs and throwing spears. The city's layout was precisely aligned with celestial events. Archaeologists have discovered a fascinating structure now known as Woodhenge, a large circle of wooden posts that functioned as a sophisticated solar calendar. On the equinoxes, the rising sun would align perfectly with a key post positioned in front of Monk's Mound, allowing the city's priests to mark the changing seasons with precision, dictating the timing of planting, harvest, and sacred rituals. This deep connection between the urban plan, the heavens, and the agricultural cycle reveals a society of profound intellectual depth and spiritual complexity, a true capital that drew people and influence from across the continent. The influence of the Mississippian culture, with Cahokia as its epicenter, rippled out across a vast region from Wisconsin to the Gulf of Mexico and from the Atlantic coast to Oklahoma. This was not a single, unified empire, but a widespread cultural phenomenon often described as the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex or the Southern Cult. What bound these far-flung chiefdoms together was a shared set of religious symbols, artistic styles, and political structures. They were connected by an extensive trade network that moved prized goods across thousands of miles. Shells from the Gulf Coast were carved into intricate gorgets and beads. Copper from the Great Lakes was hammered into ceremonial plates and ear spools, and mica from the Appalachian Mountains was cut into shimmering, otherworldly shapes. This exchange wasn't just economic, it was a circulation of power and ideology. The artwork that adorned these objects is instantly recognizable, a powerful, often somber iconography featuring a recurring cast of supernatural beings. The falcon impersonator, a warrior deity often shown holding a captive's head, the morning star, a symbol of war and sacrifice, and the ubiquitous hand and eye motif, representing the presence of the divine in the earthly realm. This shared visual language suggests a common religious foundation that legitimized the rule of a powerful elite class. This elite, the ruling nobles and priests, derived their authority from their perceived ability to intercede with the gods and control the forces of nature. Their power was visibly expressed through lavish burials, some of which provide chilling insights into the society's structure. One of the most significant finds at Cahokia is Mound 72, a ridgetop mound that contained the remains of nearly 270 individuals. Among them was the burial of a high-status man, likely a chief, who was laid to rest on a platform of 20,000 shell beads arranged in the shape of a bird. Nearby, separate pits contained the bodies of over 50 young women and 4 men, all of whom showed signs of ritual sacrifice, probably to accompany the leader into the afterlife. Another group of 39 individuals, men and women, appeared to have been executed, their hands bound behind their backs. These finds point to a society with a stark social hierarchy, where the power of life and death was concentrated in the hands of a few, and where elaborate mortuary practices reinforced the sacred and political order. Then, a century before Christopher Columbus set sail, the great city of Cahokia was abandoned. By 1400 CE, the plazas were empty, the mounds were overgrown, and the intricate social and political order that built them had collapsed. This pattern repeated itself across the Mississippian world. By the time Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto marched through the southeast in the 1540s, he encountered only the crumbling remnants of this once vibrant culture, the descendants of the mound builders living in smaller, less complex chiefdoms. The mystery of their decline has no single answer, but rather a web of interconnected crises. The leading theory points to a catastrophic period of climate change. Tree ring data reveals a series of severe droughts in the 13th and 14th centuries that would have devastated the maize-based agriculture that supported Cahokia's dense population. A famine would have shattered the social contract. The chief's primary duty was to ensure a good harvest through his connection to the gods. When the rains failed for years on end, the people's faith in their leadership would have evaporated, leading to social unrest and the dissolution of central authority. This environmental stress likely ignited widespread warfare. As resources dwindled, competition between chiefdoms would have intensified. Archaeological evidence from this period shows that Cahokia's once open city became fortified with a massive log palisade, a 2-mile-long wall topped with watchtowers. This wasn't just for show, it was a serious defensive investment, indicating a very real fear of attack. Some scholars suggest that the society may have eventually turned on itself, with a dispossessed underclass revolting against the elite who could no longer provide for them. The ritual sacrifices in Mound 72 hint at a society that was already capable of extreme violence to maintain its order. In a time of collapse, that violence may have been turned outward or inward, tearing the social fabric apart. It was likely this vicious cycle drought leading to famine which sparked warfare and internal rebellion. That caused people to simply walk away from the great mounds, leaving them as silent, grass-covered monuments to a lost American dream of urban greatness. Yet while the Mississippians were shaping the earth in North America, an equally ingenious civilization was performing a different kind of miracle half a world away, conquering one of the most hostile environments on the planet. In the searing, hyper-arid expanse of the Sahara Desert, in what is now southwestern Libya, the Garamontes built a powerful urban kingdom that turned the desert green. Flourishing from around 500 BC to 700 CE, they were not the simple nomadic barbarians described by their Roman enemies, but a sophisticated, literate society that mastered the art of survival in a land of extreme heat and endless sand through one of history's most astonishing feats of hydraulic engineering. The lifeblood of their civilization quite literally flowed beneath their feet. The Garamontes inhabited a region known as the Fazan, a basin that, while surface dry, sat atop a vast fossil aquifer, an ancient lake of underground water laid down tens of thousands of years ago when the Sahara was a verdant grassland. Their genius was in tapping this hidden resource through a complex network of underground tunnels known as fagaras, a North African term, or in Persian, kanats. This was not their invention, the technology likely diffused from Persia, but their application of it in the heart of the desert was unparalleled. The system began with a mother well dug deep into the water table, often in the foothills of a mountain range. From there, skilled Garamontian engineers would dig a gently sloping tunnel, just large enough for a person to crawl through, for miles across the desert. Every 100 feet or so, they would sink a vertical shaft to the surface to provide ventilation for the diggers and for future maintenance. The gravity-fed system was brilliantly efficient, allowing water to flow cool and clean from its source to the fields and settlements below, with minimal loss to evaporation under the relentless Saharan sun. This labyrinthine network of human-made underground rivers was the foundation of everything. It transformed the Garamantes from potential desert wanderers into settled agriculturalists with a surplus. The water channeled by the Fagaras irrigated vast oases where they grew a surprising variety of crops: wheat, barley, dates, figs, and even grapes. This agricultural wealth supported a population that may have reached as high as 100,000 people, living in a constellation of fortified towns and villages. Their capital, Garama, was a major urban center with massive mud brick structures, including a royal palace and tombs that hint at a complex, stratified society. Their wealth is also evident in their material culture. They were skilled metallurgists working with gold and silver to create fine jewelry, and their pottery shows a high degree of craftsmanship. Far from being isolated, they sat at the center of a lucrative trans-Saharan trade network. Their camel caravans, the first to regularly cross the desert, connected the Mediterranean world of the Romans and Carthaginians to the sub-Saharan African kingdoms. They traded salt and manufactured goods southward, bringing back coveted commodities like gold, ivory, and enslaved people from the African interior, amassing significant wealth and power as the essential middlemen in this daring desert commerce. For centuries, this system sustained a vibrant civilization. Then it faltered. The decline of the Garamantes was not a sudden collapse but a slow, agonizing strangulation, and its primary cause may have been the very source of their success: the water. The fossil aquifer they tapped was not a renewable resource. It was ancient water, a finite treasure chest that could not be refilled under the current arid climate. Evidence suggests they were mining this water, extracting it far faster than it could be naturally replenished. Over centuries of intensive agriculture, the water table began to drop. This would have made the Fagaras increasingly inefficient and then dry altogether. Maintaining these tunnels was a Herculean task, requiring a large, coordinated labor force to constantly clear them of sand and debris. As the water became scarcer and harder to reach, the social and economic system needed to maintain this infrastructure would have begun to crumble. A prolonged drought, which paleoclimatological records indicate struck the region around this time, would have accelerated this process, placing an impossible strain on their already dwindling resources. This internal environmental crisis made them vulnerable to external forces. In the 6th and 7th centuries CE, the power of the Eastern Roman Empire, which had been a sometimes antagonist and sometimes trading partner, waned in the region. This was followed by the explosive expansion of the Arab Islamic conquests in the 7th century. While the Arab historians record that the Garamantes submitted to the new authority, the conquest would have been the final blow to their already faltering system. The new trans-Saharan trade routes established under the Islamic caliphates likely bypassed the old Garamantian heartland in favor of more easterly paths, cutting off their remaining source of wealth. The combination was fatal: a depleted water source, a changing climate, and a radical shift in the economic and political landscape. The Garamantes did not vanish. Their descendants are almost certainly among the modern people of the Fazan. But their centralized state, their urban life, and their incredible engineering achievements were abandoned. The Fagaras slowly filled with Saharan sand, and their fortified cities were left to crumble back into the desert, a haunting monument to a civilization that brilliantly forged an empire from water and stone, only to see it slowly evaporate away. High on the arid, wind-swept Altiplano of the Andes, beside the deep blue waters of Lake Titicaca, the Tiwanaku Empire forged a civilization that seemed to defy the very limits of its harsh environment. From around 300 to 1000 CE, this powerful state emerged as the dominant cultural and political force across a vast swath of the southern Andes, its influence radiating out from its breathtaking capital city to encompass parts of modern-day Bolivia, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. What makes their achievement so staggering is the location itself. They built their metropolis at an altitude of over 12,500 feet, making it one of the highest urban centers ever created in the ancient world. In a region where the air is thin, frost is a constant threat, and the margin for agricultural error is vanishingly small. Their ability to not just survive but to thrive and expand in such conditions is a testament to a society of extraordinary resilience, technological genius, and profound spiritual vision. The heart of their world and the source of their enduring mystery is their capital, known today as Tiwanaku. Approaching the site, even in its current ruined state, is an awe-inspiring experience. The city's builders conceived of it as a physical reflection of the cosmos, a sacred landscape where the human and divine realms met. The centerpiece is the Akapana, a massive, seven-tiered platform mound that likely represented a sacred mountain, the central axis of the world in Andean belief. Originally covered in smooth stone and equipped with a complex system of subterranean stone drains, it is thought that during ritual ceremonies, water would be channeled to flow from the top of the structure down through these ducts, creating a roaring, artificial waterfall, a dramatic spectacle of power and engineering designed to awe any observer. Nearby stands the Kalasasaya, a vast rectangular enclosure whose precisely aligned gateway frames the rising sun on the equinoxes. But the most famous feature of this complex is the Gateway of the Sun, a single block of stone intricately carved with a central, imposing figure believed to be the staff god Viracocha, a deity who would later be adopted and adapted by the Incas. This figure is surrounded by 48 winged attendants, all running toward him in a mesmerizing display of symbolic art that likely encoded a complex calendar system and the empire's foundational mythology. Yet it is the stonework itself that truly separates Tiwanaku from almost every other culture. While the Incas are famous for their perfectly fitted masonry, the Tiwanaku were the true masters, the innovators from whom others learned. They worked with andesite and sandstone, some of the hardest stones available, and shaped them with an almost supernatural precision. They did not use mortar. Instead, they employed a technique of hammering, pecking, and polishing stones together until they fit with a seamless, airtight join. They crafted massive stone blocks with perfectly level faces and exact 90-degree angles. Their most sophisticated technique involved cutting precise notches, grooves, and hidden channels into individual stones so they would interlock with their neighbors, creating structures that were not only incredibly strong but also resilient to the earthquakes that frequently shake the high Andes. This was not merely construction, it was a form of high art and deep science, a technological prowess that allowed them to build for eternity. This architectural and spiritual power was supported by an economic miracle of agricultural engineering. The bitter cold and thin air of the Altiplano made conventional farming incredibly difficult. The Tiwanaku response was to create the raised field system known as suka kalas. This was a stroke of genius that transformed a liability into an overwhelming advantage. They dug a network of canals and used the excavated soil to build long, raised planting platforms. The canals filled with water which absorbed heat from the intense high-altitude sunlight during the day. At night, this stored heat was slowly released, creating a microclimate that protected the crops on the mounds from killing frost. The water in the canals also provided a source of nutrient-rich sediment and aquatic plants that could be dredged up to continuously fertilize the fields. This system was astoundingly productive, yielding bumper crops of potatoes, quinoa, and other tubers, and supporting the dense urban population of the capital. It was this agricultural surplus that fueled their expansion, allowing them to establish colonies and exert their influence across the Andes through a combination of trade, ideology, and likely coercion. For centuries, this system functioned flawlessly, creating a stable, prosperous empire. Then, around 1000 CE, it all fell apart. The great city was largely abandoned, the raised fields were left to silt up, and the Tiwanaku state dissolved into a collection of smaller, warring polities. The evidence points not to a single cataclysm, but to a slow-motion collapse driven by a devastating environmental crisis. Paleoclimatologists studying core samples from Lake Titicaca itself and from nearby glaciers have uncovered a stark story. The region was struck by a prolonged and severe drought, one that may have lasted for decades or even centuries. This was not a minor dry spell, it was a climatic shift of catastrophic proportions. For a civilization whose entire agricultural system was based on the careful management of water, this was a death sentence. The elaborate sucre colors depended on a consistent water level in the canals to function. A prolonged drought would have caused these canals to dry up, eliminating the thermal insulation that protected the crops and the source of waterborne fertilizer. Crop yields would have plummeted, leading to widespread famine. The social contract, which was based on the ability of the ruling elite and priesthood to ensure agricultural abundance through their connection to the gods, would have shattered. As hunger spread, the authority of the central government would have evaporated, likely giving way to internal rebellions, factional violence, and a desperate struggle for scarce resources. Some archaeologists also point to evidence that the society may have already been straining under its own weight. Centuries of intensive agriculture and large-scale construction may have led to local deforestation and soil exhaustion, making the population even more vulnerable to the climatic disaster when it arrived. The empire's expansive reach may have also made it harder to manage during a crisis, as distant colonies broke away and supply lines faltered. The result was a total systems failure. The people did not vanish, they dispersed, migrating away from the great capital to form smaller communities in lower, more hospitable valleys. The knowledge of their precise stoneworking and raised field agriculture was never entirely lost, however. It lived on in the legends and practices of the Aymara people who still inhabit the region, and it profoundly influenced the next great empire to rise in the Andes, the Inca, who would look upon the ruins of Tiwanaku with reverence, believing it to be the site where the world was created. The silent, majestic stones of the city stand today as a haunting monument to a civilization that reached incredible heights by mastering its world, only to be brought low when that world quite literally dried up. While the Tiwanaku were mastering the high-altitude extremes of the Andes on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, the Korean peninsula was a patchwork of competing powers, a dynamic landscape where legendary kingdoms rose to immortality while their rivals faded into near-total obscurity. The story of ancient Korea is often told through the lens of the three kingdoms Silla, Goguryeo, and Baekje, whose epic struggles and ultimate unification under Silla in 668 CE define the era. But these were not the only players on the board. Before and alongside them flourished a collection of lesser-known, mysterious tribal confederacies and statelets, societies that were eventually absorbed, conquered, or simply overshadowed, their stories erased by the victors and the passage of time. Among the most enigmatic of these were the Jinhan Confederacy and the other tribal states of the southern peninsula, cultures that formed the very genetic and cultural substrate from which the kingdom of Silla itself would eventually emerge, only to have their own distinct identities dissolved within it. The southern part of the Korean peninsula, particularly the area east of the Nakdong River, was not a vacant lot waiting for a kingdom to be built. In the centuries around the start of the Common Era, it was a vibrant, complex world of walled town states, each likely ruled by its own chief or petty king. These towns were not isolated. They began to band together into loose confederations for mutual defense, trade, and shared ritual. The most significant of these were the Jinhan, based in the heartland of what would become Silla territory, and their neighbors, the Byeonhan and Mahan confederacies to the west. Our window into their world is frustratingly narrow, filtered primarily through the accounts of Chinese dynastic histories, such as the Records of the Three Kingdoms, which viewed them from the outside as distant, exotic border peoples. From these scant references, we can piece together a picture of a society quite distinct from the highly centralized, bureaucratic kingdoms that would follow. The Jinhan were described as a people who practiced agriculture, notably rice and hemp farming, and were renowned for their expertise in iron production. The region was rich in iron ore, and they became the primary suppliers of raw iron and finished weapons to their neighbors, including the powerful Chinese commandery of Lelang to the north. This control over such a vital strategic resource suggests they were far more than simple farmers. They were essential players in a regional economy. Their social and political structure appears to have been a fascinating blend of theocratic rule and nascent aristocracy. Chinese records describe a unique form of leadership centered on a sacred, ritual object known as the sodo. This was not a person, but a place, a sacred grove or a specific tree where a ritual object, perhaps a drum or a bell, was hung. This object was believed to house a powerful deity or spirit. The Confederacy would have a priest-like figure, a shaman or chieftain, who derived his authority from his ability to mediate with the spirit of the sodo. This suggests a society where political power was intrinsically linked to spiritual intermediation, a world where the ruler's primary duty was to ensure the favor of the gods for the entire community through correct ritual practice. Alongside this, there are hints of an emerging warrior elite, chieftains who gained prestige through military prowess and control over resources like iron and land. This combination of sacred and secular power was the forge in which early Korean kingship was smithed. The material culture they left behind, though not as grandiose as the gold crowns of Silla, speaks volumes about their beliefs and connections. Jinhan pottery shows distinct regional styles, often decorated with comb pattern designs, but more telling are the burial practices. In the early period, they used dolmens and stone cist tombs, but later, a fascinating practice emerged of placing the deceased in large, elaborate pottery jars for secondary burial, a practice that suggests complex beliefs about the afterlife and the journey of the soul. The most significant archaeological finds are the artifacts that point to their wealth and trade: iron weaponry, horse fittings, and exquisite glass beads. Some of these beads, found in Jinhan tombs, have been chemically traced to origins as far away as the Mediterranean, placing this seemingly obscure confederation at the very end of the ancient world's vast Silk Road network, which stretched across Asia by both land and sea. They were not isolated backwaters, they were connected to the pulse of Eurasian exchange. The ultimate disappearance of the Jinhan and other confederacies was not the result of a sudden catastrophe or a mysterious plague. It was a slow, deliberate process of political consolidation and cultural absorption, a victim of its own success. From within the territory of the Jinhan Confederacy, one particular walled town-state began to accumulate more power and influence than its neighbors. This state was Saro, which would later rename itself Silla. Through a combination of strategic alliances, shrewd marriage politics, and military conquest, the rulers of Saro began to bring the other Jinhan towns under their direct control. This was a gradual process, taking over 2 centuries, as Silla evolved from a chiefdom into a centralized monarchy. The old, diffuse power of the Sodo priests and local chieftains was systematically replaced by the authority of a single king from the Kim dynasty, who claimed a divine right to rule. The distinct identity of the Jinhan was slowly submerged beneath a new, overarching Sillan identity. Their territories became the administrative districts of the new kingdom, their warriors became Silla soldiers, and their iron production served the Silla crown. They didn't vanish, they were assimilated. Their legacy lived on in the very foundation of the Silla state, its territory, its people, and likely many of its early customs and laws. But their unique name, their specific political structure, and their independent spirit were lost, subsumed into the grand narrative of the victorious kingdom, becoming a forgotten prologue to a more famous story. Their fate is a powerful reminder that history is most often written by the unifiers, while the rich, complex tapestry of the cultures they unified often fades into the shadows, known only through fragments in foreign texts and the silent testimony of iron slag and glass beads pulled from the earth. While the Tiwanaku and later Inca empires captured the imagination with their mountain citadels and stone mastery, the true origins of Andean civilization lie centuries earlier in a series of dusty river valleys that slice through the coastal desert of Peru. Here, over 5,000 years ago, a people known as the Norte Chico or Carol Soup civilization achieved something extraordinary. They built the first cities in the Americas, creating a complex society that stands as a foundational pillar for every culture that followed in the region. Yet they did it all without two of the things we most associate with ancient civilizations: pottery. Widespread visual art, their story is one of breathtaking innovation in the face of scarcity, a testament to human ingenuity that emerged from the stark contrast between the barren desert and the life-giving sea. The heartland of this pioneering culture was a compact network of four river valleys: the Soup, Pativilca, Fortaleza, and Huora, just north of modern-day Lima. What makes their achievement so staggering is the environment they conquered. This is a land of extreme aridity, where rain may not fall for years on end. Yet, the Norte Chico people turned this apparent wasteland into a cradle of civilization through a brilliant understanding of their resources. Their prosperity was built on a dual economic foundation, a clever synergy between the products of the desert and the bounty of the ocean. From the Pacific, just 20 miles away, they harvested an incredible wealth of seafood. Archaeological sites are filled with the remains of anchovies, sardines, and shellfish, providing a rich, reliable source of protein. But the real key to their success lay inland, in the narrow river valleys fed by water trickling down from the Andes. They became master hydraulic engineers, constructing simple but effective irrigation canals to divert this precious water to fields where they grew crops like squash, beans, avocados, and most importantly, cotton. This cotton was the engine of their economy. It wasn't primarily for clothing, it was an industrial and trade commodity. They used it to make the extensive fishing nets needed to harvest the immense schools of fish off the coast. They also likely traded it with communities in the highlands, exchanging it for essential goods they lacked, like colorful dyes, hardwoods, and the occasional ceremonial object made from imported stone. This symbiotic trade relationship between the coast and the highlands, facilitated by the Norte Chico, established a pattern that would define Andean economics for millennia. They created a society of abundance not by mastering one environment, but by acting as the vital link between two. This economic surplus fueled their most visible and enduring legacy, their architecture. The Norte Chico did not build cities of homes, they constructed vast ceremonial centers, complexes of monumental public architecture that served as the religious and administrative hearts of their society. The most famous and best studied of these is the sacred city of Carol. Approaching Carol is a humbling experience. At its center lies a massive central plaza, sunken into the earth, surrounded by 6 large platform mounds or pyramids. The largest of these, the Pyramid Mayor, stands 60 feet tall and is 500 feet across at its base. The construction of these structures was a monumental communal effort. They built using shikra bags, woven mesh nets filled with stones which were stacked to form the core of the buildings, and then faced with walls of cut stone and colored plaster. This technique provided remarkable flexibility and earthquake resistance, a necessary innovation in a seismically active region. The layout of Carol and other centers like Espero and Huaracanga reveals a sophisticated and hierarchical society. The pyramids were not tombs, they were stages for ritual. At the top of these structures were enclosed atrium rooms and sacred hearths, where evidence of large-scale burning and feasting has been found. These were likely the settings where a powerful priestly elite conducted ceremonies to maintain cosmic order. Using music as a key tool, finds of 32 flutes made from pelican and condor bones and 37 cornets made from llama and deer bones attest to the importance of ritual performance. The society was clearly stratified, with a small elite residing in large, well-built compounds near the monumental core, while the majority of the population lived in simpler, outlying structures, contributing their labor to the construction and maintenance of the sacred centers in return for security, food, and access to the spiritual power generated there. This brings us to the civilization's most perplexing mystery, the absence of two nearly universal hallmarks of ancient complex societies. Firstly, the North Chico produced no pottery. In almost every other early civilization, the invention of pottery is a crucial technological leap, used for storage, cooking, and serving food. The North Chico people used gourds and woven baskets instead. Secondly, and even more strangely, they left behind almost no visual art. There are no intricate carvings, no painted murals depicting gods or kings, no statues of rulers. We have no images of their leaders, no portraits of their deities. This makes understanding their belief system incredibly difficult. Their expression of power and ideology was not through imagery, but through architecture and sound. The scale of the plazas and pyramids and the music from their flutes and cornets were their art forms, designed to create an overwhelming sensory experience that reinforced the social order without the need for figurative representation. After flourishing for over a millennium, the light of the North Chico civilization began to dim around 1800 BCE. The great ceremonial centers were systematically abandoned, not through violent destruction, but through a slow, deliberate process of closure. At Carol, the inhabitants carefully filled in the sacred hearths on top of the pyramids and buried the grand staircases, as if formally decommissioning the site. The question of why they left has no single definitive answer, but the evidence points toward significant environmental disruption. Geological studies suggest this period was marked by increased seismic activity and, perhaps more critically, a shift in climate patterns. A prolonged drought could have severely reduced the flow of water in the rivers, crippling their irrigation-based agriculture. Conversely, a major El Niño event could have brought catastrophic rains and flooding, washing away their canals and fields, while the associated warming of Pacific waters would have killed off the nutrient-rich anchovies and sardines, devastating their maritime food supply. Either scenario would have struck at both pillars of their economy simultaneously. It is also possible that their disappearance was less about collapse and more about transformation and diaspora. The pioneering social and architectural models developed by the North Chico did not vanish, they spread. The knowledge of building platform mounds, sunken circular plazas, and managing large-scale irrigation projects diffused north, south, and east into the Andes. Their legacy is found in the foundational elements of the Chavin culture, which would later dominate the highlands, and in the coastal traditions that followed. The people of the North Chico likely did not die out. They migrated, their ideas and technologies seeding the development of new, perhaps more resilient, cultures across a wider area. Their civilization faded not with a bang, but by transforming into the bedrock of Andean civilization. Its monumental centers left as silent, enigmatic monuments to the first bold experiment in urban living in the Americas. From the coastal deserts of Peru, we now journey to the vast, windswept steppes of Central Asia, a land of constant movement and shifting fortunes, to uncover the story of a nomadic people whose westward flight set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the ancient world. This is the saga of the Yuezhi, a formidable confederation of tribes who originally thrived in the lush pastures of what is now Western China, only to be violently uprooted and cast across continents, where they would eventually forge one of history's most magnificent and paradoxical empires, the Kushan, before their original culture faded into the whispers of history. Our understanding of the Yuezhi's earliest days comes almost exclusively from the meticulous records of Chinese historians, who knew them as a powerful and prosperous people dominating the critical corridor of the Hexi Corridor in the modern-day Gansu province. This was no minor tribe of wandering herders. The Yuezhi were the masters of the premier trade route between the celestial empire of China and the wild west of Central Asia. Their wealth and influence were built on a magnificent and coveted commodity, the horse. They controlled the breeding and trade of the fabled Fergana horses, the heavenly steeds that were larger, stronger, and faster than any other breed known to the Chinese. These horses were so prized that Chinese emperors would launch military expeditions just to acquire them. But the Yuezhi's most crucial role was as the primary middlemen for the flow of another, even more precious good, jade. The rich jade deposits of the Cotton region, highly valued for its spiritual and artistic significance in Chinese culture, passed through Yuezhi hands on its way east, filling their coffers with immense profits and solidifying their status as the indispensable economic gatekeepers of the region. This golden age of Yuezhi dominance was shattered in the 2nd century BCE by the sudden, violent rise of a rival nomadic confederacy, the Xiongnu. Under the leadership of their formidable Chanyu, or ruler, Madu, the Xiongnu forged a terrifying military machine that united the steppe tribes under a single banner. Around 176 BC, the Xiongnu turned their fury upon the Yuezhi. In a devastating and decisive campaign, the Xiongnu forces attacked, crushing the Yuezhi armies, killing their king, and according to grisly legend, fashioning his skull into a drinking cup for their victorious leader. This was more than a military defeat. It was a profound cultural and psychological humiliation. Shattered and leaderless, the bulk of the Yuezhi people were forced to abandon their ancestral homelands. They began a desperate, generations-long migration west, a monumental exodus that would see them become a nation of refugees, pushed from their prosperous lands and into the dangerous, unknown territories of Central Asia, becoming a domino that would itself set off a cascade of other tribal movements. Their journey was a harrowing trial of survival. As they moved west, they collided with another nomadic power, the Soccas, displacing them and setting off a chain reaction of migrations that would eventually push these tribes into Parthian and Greco-Bactrian territories. The Yuezhi themselves eventually settled in the region of Transoxiana, north of the Amu Darya River in the area of Sogdiana. Here, they splintered into 5 distinct tribes, each with its own leader, vying for supremacy in their new home. A century later, continued pressure from northern rivals, possibly including the Wusun tribe who were themselves pushed by the Xiongnu, forced the Yuezhi to move again, this time south across the Amu Darya into the region of Bactria, which had once been the heart of a prosperous Greco-Bactrian kingdom. It was here, amidst the ruins of Greek cities and the fusion of Hellenistic and local cultures, that one of the 5 Yuezhi tribes, the Kushans, began its remarkable ascent to power. Under the leadership of a chieftain named Kujula Kadphises, the Kushans began a methodical campaign of conquest, uniting the other 4 Yuezhi tribes under their banner and then expanding their territory with stunning speed. By the 1st century CE, the Khmer Empire had emerged as a colossal superpower, stretching from the banks of the Amu Darya across northern India, deep into the Ganges River Valley and east into the Tarim Basin. They now controlled key segments of the Silk Road, positioned directly between the 4 great empires of the age: Rome, Parthia, Han China, and the burgeoning Satavahana dynasty in India. This strategic position made their capital, Purashapura, a dazzling cosmopolitan hub where goods, ideas, and people from across the ancient world converged. The most fascinating aspect of the Khmer Empire is the profound cultural transformation its founders underwent. The Yuezhi, who began as nomadic pastoralists, became the patrons of a breathtakingly syncretic civilization. They adopted and blended elements from every culture they encountered. Their art, known as Gandharan art, is a stunning fusion of Greek realism, Indian spirituality, and Persian influences, producing some of the most beautiful and serene Buddha statues ever created, which depict the enlightened one with the physical grace of a Greek god. Their coinage is a virtual encyclopedia of their eclectic pantheon, minting coins that feature Greek deities like Helios and Selene, Iranian gods like Mithra and Varithragna, and Indian figures like Shiva, all alongside depictions of their own deified emperors. The greatest of these rulers, Kanishka the Great, was a monumental figure who convened a great Buddhist council, patronized scholars and artists, and presided over an era of unprecedented religious tolerance and intellectual exchange. The Yuezhi had not just built an empire, they had become the architects of a unique cultural bridge between East and West. This magnificent evolution, however, came at a cost to their original identity. The very act of building and administering a vast, sedentary, multi-ethnic empire required the Kushans to shed the nomadic ways of their Yuezhi ancestors. They adopted local languages for administration, first Greek and then Bactrian, writing it in a modified Greek script. Their original language, likely an Eastern Iranian dialect, faded from official use. Their tribal social structure was replaced by the complex bureaucracy of an imperial state. The culture that emerged in the Kushan Empire was a brilliant new synthesis, but it was no longer purely or even primarily Yuezhi. They had been absorbed into the fabric of the world they conquered, their identity diluted and transformed by the immense gravitational pull of the settled civilizations of India and Central Asia. The disappearance of the Yuezhi as a distinct people was not a single event, but this gradual process of assimilation. By the 3rd century CE, the Kushan Empire itself began to fragment under pressure from the rising Sasanian Empire in Persia and internal dynastic struggles. As the empire weakened and split into smaller kingdoms, the distinct Yuezhi identity, already blurred by centuries of cultural fusion, melted away entirely. They intermarried with the local populations of Bactria, Gandhara, and India, their genetic and cultural lineage becoming one thread among many in the rich tapestry of South and Central Asian history. They left behind no cities bearing their original name, no written records in their own tongue, and no distinctive art that harkened back to their nomadic origins on the borders of China. Their legacy is the magnificent hybrid culture of the Kushan Empire itself, a testament to the incredible adaptability of a people who, after a catastrophic defeat, journeyed across a continent and remade themselves as the rulers of a world they helped connect, leaving their original selves as little more than a name in Chinese annals, a ghost at the dawn of the Silk Road. Emerging from the mists of prehistory, the story of human expansion across the vast Pacific Ocean is one of the most awe-inspiring chapters in our species' journey. And at the very heart of this epic saga lies a civilization of unparalleled nautical courage and cultural influence, the Lapita people. Beginning around 1600 BCE, these audacious seafarers embarked from the islands of Southeast Asia, launching themselves into the endless blue expanse of the Pacific in elegant, ocean-going canoes. Theirs was not a haphazard drift, it was a deliberate, generations-long voyage of discovery that would eventually populate 1/3 of the globe, from the islands of Melanesia to the remote corners of Polynesia. They were the foundational ancestors of countless Pacific Island cultures, the original explorers who first heard the whisper of the wind through coconut palms on shores where no human had ever stood. The most tangible, mesmerizing signature of their presence is their extraordinary pottery. Across a staggering swath of ocean, from the Bismarck Archipelago to Samoa, a distance of over 4,000 miles, archaeologists unearth fragments of ceramics adorned with intricate geometric designs. These are not simple patterns, they are masterpieces of precision created by using a delicate dentate stamp, a small tool, perhaps a comb or a piece of carved shell, to imprint the clay with repeating motifs of faces, birds, and intricate scrollwork before firing. What is truly astonishing is the consistency of this style across such vast distances and centuries of travel. Finding a piece of this pottery on a beach in Vanuatu that is stylistically identical to one found in Fiji is like finding a specific, handwritten note in 2 different cities across the world. It is irrefutable proof of a shared culture, a people connected by blood and tradition, not just isolated islands. This distinctive pottery acts as a trail of breadcrumbs marking their progress eastward across the Pacific, an artistic fingerprint left on every new island they settled. Their voyage was the ultimate act of human courage and ingenuity. Imagine setting out from the safety of a known island, loading a double-hulled canoe with all the necessities for survival: families, domesticated animals like pigs, chickens, and dogs, root crops like taro and yam, and precious coconut seedlings. With no compasses, no charts, and no knowledge of what, if anything, lay beyond the horizon, they navigated by reading the subtle language of the ocean itself. They memorized the paths of stars as they rose and set, watched the direction of swells and the flight patterns of seabirds that might indicate nearby land, and read the colors and reflections in the clouds. Each successful voyage was a triumph of knowledge and observation, a leap of faith that established a new outpost of humanity. They settled on islands both large and small, from the massive landmasses like Viti Levu in Fiji to tiny, remote atolls, adapting to each new environment with incredible skill. For nearly a millennium, the Lapita culture thrived as a widespread network of connected communities. Then, around 500 BC, their distinct cultural signature begins to fade from the archaeological record. The production of their classic dentate-stamped pottery ceases entirely. This is not evidence of a sudden catastrophe, but rather a gradual cultural transformation. The most widely accepted theory is that the Lapita didn't disappear in a dramatic collapse, they simply evolved. As their descendants continued to voyage even further east, reaching the remote islands of Tonga, Samoa, and beyond, they entered a region where high-quality clay for pottery became increasingly scarce. Faced with this practical challenge, their material culture adapted. The intricate pottery tradition was gradually abandoned, replaced by other forms of artistic expression like wood carving, tapa cloth making, and tattoo art, which became the new hallmarks of the emerging Polynesian cultures. In this view, the Lapita did not vanish. They became the Maori of New Zealand, the Hawaiians, the Tahitians, and the Rapa Nui. Their legacy is not a mystery of disappearance, but a living, breathing presence in the languages, traditions, and very DNA of millions of Pacific Islanders today. However, this story of peaceful evolution may not be the complete picture. On some of the smaller, more fragile islands they settled, environmental pressures likely played a decisive role in the end of the classic Lapita way of life. Isolated on tiny atolls with limited resources, these communities were exquisitely vulnerable to natural disasters. A single powerful hurricane could destroy crops and erase fresh water sources. A prolonged drought, a tsunami, or even the inevitable ecological changes caused by human arrival, such as the deforestation of small islands or the overhunting of local bird and marine life, could have pushed these isolated pockets of Lapita culture to a tipping point. A community that lost its canoe-building trees, for instance, would be trapped, unable to trade or seek resources from neighboring islands. On these smaller islands, it is possible that some groups did face local extinctions or were forced to abandon their homes in a final, desperate voyage, their specific cultural practices dissolving in the struggle for survival. The end of the Lapita was likely a mosaic of both triumph and tragedy, a glorious evolution into the great Polynesian nations on the larger islands, and a quiet fading on the more remote and vulnerable specks of land they had so courageously reached. Their story is ultimately one of incredible success, a civilization that literally built its world anew on hundreds of distant horizons. Its cultural flame not extinguished but scattered to the wind, burning brighter than ever in the hearts of their Polynesian descendants. While the Lapita were charting the vast Pacific, another story of incredible adaptation was unfolding in one of North America's most unforgiving environments. In the scorching, sun-baked heart of what is now southern Arizona, the Hohokam culture performed a miracle of hydraulic engineering, transforming the arid Sonoran Desert into a flourishing agricultural landscape. For over 1,000 years, from approximately 300 to 1450 CE, they built a complex society whose scale and sophistication were unmatched in the prehistoric American Southwest. only to see their carefully managed world eventually fracture and empty, leaving behind a haunting network of canals and the enigmatic ruins of their ball courts. The sheer ambition of the Hohokam water management system is what first commands awe. In a land where annual rainfall is scarce and unpredictable, they did not merely survive, they thrived by harnessing the power of desert rivers, primarily the Salt and Gila. They constructed the most extensive and sophisticated irrigation network in pre-Columbian North America, a vast web of canals that stretched for hundreds of miles. Using stone tools and woven baskets to move earth, they dug channels that were monumental in scale. Some main canals were over 15 feet deep and 30 feet wide, capable of carrying thousands of gallons of water to fields many miles distant. This was not a haphazard project. It required a highly organized society with the centralized planning and labor coordination to survey routes, maintain the channels, and allocate water fairly among farmers. This mastery over water allowed them to support a large population, cultivating crops of maize, beans, squash, and cotton in the desert sun, creating a verdant, managed oasis in the wilderness. This agricultural surplus fueled the growth of large, bustling villages. The Hohokam were not just farmers, they were accomplished artists and traders. They are renowned for their stunning shell jewelry, crafting intricate bracelets, pendants, and rings from shell acquired from the Sea of Cortez, over 200 miles away, indicating participation in vast trade networks. They also produced a distinct style of pottery, often buff-colored and decorated with bold red designs. But perhaps the most intriguing and culturally significant structures they built were their ball courts. Found at major villages like Snaketown and Casa Grande, these were large, oval-shaped depressions, bermed with earth and capable of holding hundreds of spectators. The presence of these courts, similar to those found far to the south in Mesoamerica, provides compelling evidence of cultural contact and the sharing of ideas across vast distances. The ballgame played here was likely more than a sport. It was a deeply ritualized event, possibly involving wagering, political negotiation, or religious ceremonies reenacting cosmological myths. For centuries, this system of water, agriculture, and culture functioned in a delicate balance. Then, in the 14th and 15th centuries, that balance was lost. The great villages were gradually abandoned, the canals silted up, and the Hohokam way of life disintegrated. Unlike a single catastrophic event, their collapse appears to have been a slow unraveling, a result of multiple converging pressures that eventually overwhelmed their societal resilience. A major factor was almost certainly environmental. Tree ring data reveals the region was struck by a series of severe and prolonged droughts in the 1300s. For a civilization entirely dependent on canal irrigation, a long-term reduction in river flow would have been disastrous, leading to crop failure, famine, and fierce competition over the dwindling water supply. This environmental stress was likely amplified by a problem of their own success: salinization. Intensive, long-term irrigation in arid environments has a dangerous side effect. As water evaporates from the fields, it leaves behind dissolved salts. Over generations, these salts accumulate in the soil, eventually reaching toxic levels that poison the crops and render the land infertile. The Hohokam, for all their engineering genius, likely had no way to leach these salts from their fields. They were slowly killing the very land that fed them. Furthermore, the same climate volatility that brought drought could also deliver its opposite, catastrophic flooding. There is evidence that massive floods in the 14th century breached their carefully constructed canal heads and ditches, causing catastrophic erosion and depositing layers of silt that would have taken a monumental effort to clear, an effort a society already under strain may have been unable to muster. These ecological crises would have placed unbearable strain on the social and political fabric of Hohokam society. The centralized authority needed to maintain the massive canal network would have weakened as its leaders failed to ensure prosperity. This could have led to internal conflict as different villages or kin groups fought over control of the remaining water and fertile land. Some archaeological sites show evidence of violence and the construction of defensive walls during this period, suggesting a breakdown of the cooperative spirit that had once defined their culture. It is also possible that people simply voted with their feet, gradually dispersing into smaller, more mobile family groups that could survive through foraging and small-scale farming, abandoning the complex, centralized way of life that had become unsustainable. The Hohokam did not vanish. They likely splintered and were absorbed by their neighbors, and their descendants are believed to be among the modern Owadam peoples of the region. Their story is a powerful cautionary tale about the fragility of even the most ingenious human systems when faced with the relentless and unpredictable forces of nature. South of the mighty Egyptian Empire, beyond the traditional border at the first cataract of the Nile, a powerful and independent kingdom rose to challenge the supremacy of the pharaohs for nearly 1,000 years. This was the kingdom of Khmer, a formidable Nubian civilization that flourished in the Sudan region from approximately 2,500 to 1,500 BC. While the Egyptians often dismissively referred to their southern neighbors as wretched Kush, the reality was far different. Khmer was a sophisticated, wealthy, and fiercely independent state that built a unique culture, developed a powerful economy, and for centuries successfully resisted the might of its northern rival, creating a fascinating and often overlooked chapter in African history. The heart of their power was their capital city, also named Khmer, a sprawling urban center that has revealed itself to archaeologists as a place of surprising grandeur and organization. The most iconic and enduring symbols of their architectural prowess are the massive structures known as defufas, a local term for these ancient mud brick edifices. The Western Defufa is the largest and most famous, a colossal, three-story temple fortress that still towers over 60 feet high today, over 3.5 millennia after it was built. This was not a simple pile of mud bricks, it was a meticulously engineered complex. Its core was solid, but it contained a labyrinth of narrow corridors, staircases leading to elevated altars, and chambers whose walls were once vibrantly painted with colorful geometric and floral designs. The construction required an enormous, coordinated labor force to produce and lay millions of sun-dried bricks, a testament to a highly organized and centralized society capable of marshaling its people for massive public works. This great defufa was likely the religious and administrative core of the city, a place where the king, who may also have served as the high priest, performed sacred rituals to maintain the favor of the gods. Beyond this ceremonial center, Khmer was a bustling metropolis. Excavations have revealed a city protected by massive defensive walls, within which lay workshops for skilled artisans, extensive residential areas, and royal palaces. Their urban planning was sophisticated, with houses featuring circular floor plans, a distinct architectural style that set them apart from the rectangular homes of Egypt. The city was also a major industrial and commercial hub. The Khmerans were master craftsmen, particularly in metalworking. They established large-scale workshops for smelting bronze, producing not only practical tools and weapons, but also exquisite jewelry and ceremonial objects. Their potters developed a distinctive black-topped red ware that was both beautiful and highly functional, and their production was so prolific that examples of Khmer pottery have been found at sites throughout Nubia and deep into Egypt, evidence of a vibrant trade network. This economic power was not built on craftsmanship alone. The Kingdom of Khmer controlled a vast territory, stretching along the Nile for hundreds of miles and deep into the African interior. This strategic position allowed them to become the paramount middlemen in a lucrative trade that flowed between tropical Africa and Egypt. From the south came the most coveted commodities of the ancient world: gold from the deserts, ebony and ivory from the interior, and most importantly, a steady supply of enslaved people and exotic animals like giraffes, monkeys, and leopards, which were highly prized by the Egyptian elite. Khmer merchants would gather these goods and funnel them north, amassing immense wealth and acquiring luxury items like Egyptian wine, olive oil, and finely crafted artifacts in return. This economic clout, combined with their military prowess, made Khmer a genuine superpower in its own right, an equal to Egypt that could not be ignored or easily dominated. This equality inevitably led to conflict. For centuries, the relationship between Khmer and Egypt was a complex dance of trade, tentative diplomacy, and outright warfare. During periods of Egyptian weakness, such as the First and Second Intermediate periods, the Kingdom of Khmer grew dramatically in power and influence. They expanded their territory northward, forging alliances with local chieftains in Upper Egypt and even establishing a presence in Egyptian border fortresses. There is compelling evidence that they may have supported Theban rivals during the Second Intermediate period, effectively playing Egyptian politics to their own advantage. The Egyptians, for their part, viewed Khmer with a mixture of desire and dread, a source of incredible wealth but also a formidable military threat. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom built a string of massive mud brick fortresses along the Nile at the Second Cataract, some of the most impressive military architecture of the ancient world. These forts, with their soaring walls, projecting bastions, and water-filled moats, were not built for offense. They were a desperate defensive barrier, a clear indication that the Egyptian state lived in genuine fear of the powerful army of Khmer. That Khmer army was a force to be reckoned with. Egyptian reliefs and archaeological finds give us a picture of a highly effective military machine. Khmer soldiers were famously equipped with powerful composite bows, and they were skilled archers. They also fought with bronze daggers, maces, and wore distinctive leather caps studded with colorful stone beads for protection. But perhaps their most feared warriors were the Medjay, fierce desert nomads from the eastern deserts who were hired as mercenaries by the Khmer kings and were renowned for their skills in reconnaissance and irregular warfare. This powerful military allowed Khmer to resist Egyptian incursions for centuries, turning the Nile south of the First Cataract into a contested borderland and a constant source of tension. The end for the Kingdom of Khmer came with the rise of the Egyptian New Kingdom, a period of renewed imperial vigor and expansionism. The pharaohs of the early 18th dynasty, particularly Thutmose I and his grandson Thutmose Roman III, were determined to break the power of Khmer once and for all and secure unfettered access to the wealth of the south. They launched a series of brutal, full-scale military campaigns down the Nile. The Egyptian army, now battle-hardened from expelling the Hyksos and armed with new technologies like the horse-drawn chariot, proved to be an unstoppable force. They besieged and captured the great fortresses, marched on the capital city of Khmer itself, and sacked it. Egyptian inscriptions boast of the utter destruction they wrought. They claim to have ripped down the city's walls, set fire to the royal palaces and granaries, and even to have ordered the systematic destruction of the prized Khmer cemeteries, where generations of kings and elites were buried under massive, circular tumuli alongside hundreds of sacrificed retainers. The conquest was followed by a deliberate and thorough policy of cultural assimilation. Egypt annexed the entire territory, establishing a new colonial administration and flooding the region with Egyptian officials, soldiers, and priests. The indigenous Khmer culture was systematically suppressed. The worship of Egyptian gods, particularly Amun, was imposed, and great temples were built to solidify Egyptian religious control. The local language and customs were discouraged in favor of Egyptian ones. Over the course of a few generations, the distinct identity of the Kingdom of Khmer was methodically erased. The people of Nubia did not vanish, but their political independence and unique cultural expression were extinguished, absorbed into the vast, homogenizing machine of the Egyptian Empire. The Great Tefufa was left as a silent, crumbling witness to a once great civilization that had dared to stand as an equal to Egypt, a powerful kingdom that was ultimately conquered, not by a more advanced culture, but by a more ruthless and expansive military power. Nestled in the fertile valley that would one day cradle the sprawling metropolis of Mexico City, a unique and artistically brilliant culture emerged from the shadows of early Mesoamerican prehistory. This was the Tila-Tilco culture, a society that flourished between 1250 and 800 BCE, leaving behind not grand pyramids or stone stelae, but an intimate and hauntingly beautiful collection of ceramic art that offers a tantalizing, fragmented window into their world. The very name Tila-Tilco comes from the Nahuatl language meaning place of hidden things, a fitting title bestowed long after their disappearance, as their secrets were indeed hidden, waiting to be unearthed from the ancient clay. The heart of their legacy and the source of their enduring fascination lies in the thousands of ceramic figurines discovered in their burial grounds. These were not the formal, rigid sculptures of later empires. They were small, hand-modeled vessels and figures pulsing with life, individuality, and a surprising modern sensibility. Tila-Tilco artisans possessed an extraordinary talent for capturing the human form in all its variety and vitality. They crafted figures of women with elaborate hairstyles and patterned clothing, dancers frozen mid-movement, and acrobats contorted into impossible poses. But their most famous and enigmatic creations are the so-called pretty ladies and the bizarre, captivating figures with anatomical anomalies. These pieces display a level of naturalism and expressive power that is almost unparalleled in the ancient Americas, making them feel instantly recognizable and yet profoundly mysterious. It is the abnormal figurines that have sparked the most intense debate and speculation. The Tila-Tilco artists produced a significant number of pieces featuring startling dualities and deformities. Figures with two complete heads, faces split directly down the middle with two different expressions, or hunchbacks with exaggerated curved spines. The most haunting are the acrobat figures whose bodies are bent backwards into a full circle, their heads touching their feet. For decades, scholars interpreted these as purely symbolic or mythological representations, perhaps depicting shamanic transformations, deities, or concepts of duality and balance that were so central to later Mesoamerican thought. The two-headed figures, for instance, could be an early exploration of the life and death dichotomy or a representation of a supernatural being. However, a more startling and compelling modern theory suggests that many of these figurines are not myth at all, but medicine. Prominent bioarchaeologists and physicians have noted that the anatomical accuracy of these conditions is astonishing. The cleft faces perfectly represent a severe congenital condition known as craniofacial duplication or diprosopis. The hunchbacks are precise depictions of kyphosis, a severe curvature of the spine. The acrobats may represent a condition known as arthrogryposis, which causes extreme joint contractures. This has led to a revolutionary idea that the Tila-Tilco were creating a kind of medical record, a ceramic documentation of the birth defects and physical conditions they observed within their community. The figures may have been used in ritual healing practices, perhaps as votive offerings to appease gods or spirits believed to cause such conditions, or as a way to magically transfer the affliction from a person into the clay object. This practice would find echoes millennia later in ex voto offerings in Catholic churches. This perspective transforms these figurines from abstract art into a deeply human record of a society grappling with the mysteries of health, disability, and birth, revealing a people of both immense artistic talent and keen, empathetic observation. Beyond their famous figurines, the Tila-Tilco people were skilled farmers who cultivated maize, beans, and squash in the rich soil of the lake basin, and they were active participants in a wide-reaching trade network that connected them to other emerging cultures. Excavations of their graves reveal goods from distant lands, obsidian for tools, iron ore mirrors, and beautiful jade and serpentine ornaments. This points to a society that was not isolated but was actively engaged with the wider Mesoamerican world, absorbing influences and exchanging ideas. Their burial practices themselves show a clear social stratification. Some individuals were interred with rich offerings of pottery and jewelry, while others were buried with little more than a simple vessel, indicating the emergence of a class-based society with a wealthy elite. The end of the distinct Tila-Tilco culture around 800 BC is one of transition, not catastrophe. There is no evidence of a violent invasion or a sudden ecological disaster that wiped them out. Instead, the archaeological record shows a gradual but decisive shift in artistic styles, ceramic technology, and religious iconography. The unique Tila-Tilco figurines cease to be produced, and in their place, new forms of art and symbolism begin to appear, forms that are unmistakably Olmec. The jaguar imagery, the word jaguar babies, and the colossal head motif that define the Olmec heartland on the Gulf Coast begin to show up with increasing frequency in the Valley of Mexico. The most widely accepted theory is that Tila-Tilco did not collapse but was culturally absorbed. The Olmec civilization, as the first truly pan-Mesoamerican culture, exerted a tremendous influence over the region, a phenomenon some scholars call the Olmec horizon. This was likely not a military conquest, but a process of ideological and cultural diffusion. The Olmec's complex belief system, with its powerful shaman rulers and its potent jaguar deity, may have simply offered a more compelling and structured worldview. The local Tila-Tilco elite may have adopted Olmec styles and practices to enhance their own prestige and power, aligning themselves with the dominant cultural force of the age. Over generations, this process of assimilation would have diluted the unique Tila-Tilco identity, blending it seamlessly into the emerging Olmec-influenced tapestry of the region. The people of Tila-Tilco did not vanish, they evolved, their artistic genius and societal foundations becoming a crucial ingredient in the simmering pot of Mesoamerican civilization, helping to fuel the rise of the first great cultural empire of the Americas before fading quietly into its shadow. From the unique artistic expressions of the Tila-Tilco, we now travel across the Atlantic and rewind the clock to a pivotal era in ancient Europe, where a new kind of artifact begins to appear in graves from Scotland to North Africa and from Hungary to the British Isles. This is the story of the Bell Beaker culture, a phenomenon that swept across the continent between 2800 and 1800 BC, not as a sweeping invasion in the traditional sense, but as a powerful and pervasive idea. Their name comes from their most iconic object, a distinctive, inverted bell-shaped drinking vessel, often beautifully decorated with intricate geometric patterns pressed into the clay with cord or comb stamps. But these beakers were far more than just pottery. They were the emblem of a revolutionary social package that would forever alter the genetic and cultural landscape of Western Europe, spreading a new way of life, death, and technology that culminated in one of history's most profound and silent transformations. The true mystery of the Bell Beaker culture lies not in a single, centralized heartland, but in its astonishingly wide distribution and the fascinating question of how it spread. For decades, archaeologists fiercely debated two opposing theories. The first proposed a massive migration of people, a wave of beaker folk spreading out from a single origin point, perhaps in the Iberian Peninsula or Central Europe, carrying their customs with them and replacing or subjugating the existing Neolithic populations. The second theory argued for a cultural diffusion where the prestigious Bell Beaker package, the pots, the weapons, the burial styles was adopted by local leaders across Europe as a powerful status symbol, a kind of prehistoric luxury brand that signified membership in a new pan-European elite network. This was a classic standoff between people moving versus ideas moving. Then, ancient DNA offered a startlingly clear answer. Genetic evidence from hundreds of skeletons buried with beaker artifacts reveals a dramatic story. In places like Britain, the analysis shows an astonishingly swift and near-total replacement of the existing population. The genes of the people who built Stonehenge, the Neolithic farmers with their ancestry rooted in Anatolia, virtually disappear from the genetic record. In their place, we see the abrupt emergence of a new genetic profile, one overwhelmingly descended from pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, who themselves were part of the larger Yamnaya migration. This suggests that the spread of the Bell Beaker culture into Britain was indeed accompanied by a massive, rapid migration that almost completely displaced the previous inhabitants. However, the story on the continent is more mixed, showing greater genetic continuity, indicating that in some regions the Beaker identity was indeed adopted by local people. So the truth is a complex blend of both theories. A massive migration of people who carried the culture with them, which was then in some areas adopted and adapted by the survivors, creating a new hybrid reality. This mobile, dynamic culture introduced a new social archetype, the warrior archer. The classic Bell Beaker grave, known as the standard package, paints a vivid picture of this ideal. A single individual, usually a male, would be buried in a crouched position, often oriented with the head to the north. Beside him would be placed his Bell Beaker pot, likely containing a fermented drink for the afterlife. But this was not a peaceful farmer's burial. He was accompanied by his weapons, finely pressure-flaked barbed and tanged arrowheads designed to cause lethal wounds, and a wrist guard or bracer of stone to protect the arm from the snap of the bowstring. This was the toolkit of a skilled archer, a hunter, and a warrior. The grave might also contain copper daggers, V-perforated buttons for a fine woolen garment, and sometimes even gold ornaments. This burial kit signifies a profound shift in social values, away from the communal, ancestor-focused monuments of the Neolithic and toward a new era celebrating individual prowess, martial skill, and personal prestige displayed through finely crafted goods. This shift was powered by a technological revolution, the mastery of metallurgy. The Bell Beaker people were not the first to use copper in Europe, but they were instrumental in its widespread adoption and in the eventual transition to the Bronze Age. Their graves frequently contain the first metal daggers and awls found in many regions. Their mastery of archery is also a form of technological sophistication, requiring expert knowledge of woodworking, flint knapping, and ballistics. Their movement across Europe likely acted as a transmission belt for these new technologies, connecting metal ore sources in places like Ireland and the Alps with the know-how to smelt and work them. They were the vanguard of a new age where value was increasingly placed on rare materials and specialized craftsmanship that could be traded and displayed, laying the economic and social groundwork for the full-fledged Bronze Age societies that would follow. So what happened to this widespread and influential culture? Their disappearance around 1800 BCE is not a story of collapse and abandonment, but one of evolution and assimilation. The Bell Beaker culture did not vanish. It successfully achieved its own goals and in doing so made itself obsolete. The networks they established, the technologies they spread, and the social structures they pioneered became the new normal. The distinct Bell Beaker package, the specific style of pot, the single grave burial with its particular set of goods gradually fell out of fashion. The people themselves did not disappear. They became the foundation of the new local Bronze Age cultures that emerged across Europe. In the British Isles, the Wessex culture with its rich chieftain burials in round barrows grew directly from the Beaker foundation. In Central Europe, their descendants became part of the Unanswered culture, famed for its advanced metalworking. They had successfully integrated Europe, facilitating the flow of people, ideas, and technology on an unprecedented scale. Having forged a new social and genetic landscape, their unique identity simply melted away, absorbed into the very fabric of the continent they helped to transform. The Beakers themselves were retired, but the world they helped create was just beginning. And so our journey through 30 vanished worlds draws to a close, leaving us not with a simple list of names and dates, but with a profound and haunting pattern etched across the tapestry of human history. From the sun-scorched deserts of the Garamontes to the misty highlands of the Tarona, from the bustling Indus Valley metropolises to the remote isolation of Rapa Nui, these stories of collapse echo with a startlingly familiar refrain. They reveal that no matter how grand the architecture, how sophisticated the technology, or how deep the spiritual beliefs, every civilization is engaged in a delicate dance with forces both within and beyond its control. One of the most persistent themes we've encountered is the precarious relationship between human societies and their environment. Time and again, we see that a civilization's greatest strength can become its most critical vulnerability. The Khmer Empire's brilliant hydraulic system, the Hohokam's vast irrigation canals, the Rapa Nui's forest, each was a masterpiece of engineering that allowed them to flourish, yet each also made them exquisitely sensitive to changes in climate. Prolonged droughts, shifting monsoons, or sudden cataclysms like the Thera eruption or El Niño events acted not merely as setbacks, but as triggers for a cascading failure. These societies were often optimized for a specific climate reality, and when that reality changed, their complex systems fractured under the strain. It's a powerful reminder that our own modern world is built upon assumptions of environmental stability that we can no longer take for granted. Closely tied to this is the critical issue of resource management. The story of Easter Island stands as the ultimate cautionary tale, a microcosm of a society that failed to recognize the limits of its isolated ecosystem. But they were not alone. The deforestation that plagued the Maya and the ancestral Pueblones, the soil salinization that may have crippled the Hohokam, and the unsustainable mining of fossil water by the Garamontes all point to a recurring challenge: the difficulty of balancing immediate needs with long-term sustainability. These civilizations often expanded and consumed resources at a pace that outstripped their environment's ability to regenerate, a warning that resonates deeply in our era of climate change and resource depletion. External pressures, whether from human rivals or invisible pathogens, also feature prominently in these narratives. The Hittites and the late Bronze Age world were likely shattered by a perfect storm of climate change, internal rebellion, and the mysterious sea peoples. The conquests of the Assyrians, Romans, and Spanish spelled the end for Dilmun, the Nabateans, and the Tarona, respectively. And perhaps most tragically, the introduction of European diseases to the Americas decimated indigenous populations like the Mississippians, often before European explorers ever even laid eyes on their cities. This reminds us that isolation is no guarantee of safety, and that interconnectedness, while a source of wealth and ideas, also brings vulnerability to external shocks and conflicts. Yet external forces alone rarely tell the whole story. The internal social fabric of a civilization, its beliefs, its hierarchies, its resilience, often determined its fate. The ideology of divine kingship, so powerful for the Maya and the Khmer, became a fatal liability when kings could no longer deliver reign and prosperity. The enormous labor required to build moai or maintain fagaras may have created social inequalities and resentments that boiled over during times of crisis. The Mocha's ritual sacrifices and the Cahokian elite's control over resources may have sowed the seeds of internal revolt when faith in the system collapsed. A society's ability to adapt, to innovate socially as well as technologically, and to maintain a degree of equity and cohesion proved just as important as its ability to build monuments. So what lessons do these silent stones and buried cities hold for us today? Our modern global civilization is in many ways the culmination of all these stories, a network of unprecedented complexity, scale, and technological power. But we are not immune to the patterns of the past. We too face the threats of climate volatility, resource depletion, and potential social fracture. The tales of these 30 lost civilizations are not just morbid curiosities, they are a library of case studies in societal resilience. They teach us the importance of diversification over optimization, of building flexible systems that can withstand shocks, and of fostering social trust and cooperation. Perhaps the most crucial lesson is that collapse is rarely a singular event, but a process, a slow unraveling where challenges compound one another until the social contract breaks. Recognizing these patterns in our own world is the first step toward forging a different path. As we look out at the hauntingly beautiful ruins of these once great societies, we are faced with a poignant question: what will future archaeologists say about us? What fragments of our world will they unearth, and what story will they tell about our choices? We'd love to hear which of these lost civilizations captured your imagination the most. Was it the mysterious script of the Indus Valley, the astronomical genius of the Maya, the sheer isolation of the Rapa Nui, or the artistic explosion of Sangsingdui? Let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts and theories on why these societies continue to fascinate us centuries after their disappearance. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the forgotten corners of our past. The story of humanity is still being written, and understanding those who came before is the key to navigating our own future.